A dark-haired young man was injured by a flying fountain pen, leaving a cut on his cheek. A loud voice shouted and told the dark-haired young man to calm down. The boy was standing right in front of the man sitting at the table. The man was very angry. He pointed his index finger at the boy and shouted at him about what he was doing because he just kept complaining. The dark-haired young man asked the man named Luke to calm down and said that he was not complaining about anything. The young man looked very depressed. The man continued to point his finger at the young man and shout that even now, this time, the young man was still complaining. A loud scream echoed throughout the building. Luke said that it was true that the boy named Lionel was the deputy commander of the Golden Thread clan, so he did not say anything about the boy voicing his opinions on the clan's management everywhere. Two young men were walking towards the building and heard the screams. Luke continued to scream and ask Lionel why he was even mentioning his love affairs. The fair-haired youth approaching the doors asked the commander not to be angry, but his comrade said that this time everything would be completely different. Lionel said he wasn't complaining about Luke's personal life, he was just asking him to draw a clear line between his personal and work lives. Luke was very surprised. Lionel thought that it all started about a month ago. A girl named Fina came to them when she saw a recruitment poster. Luke ended up falling in love with her at first sight. It was not surprising that a love affair could develop between a man and a young girl. Their clan, the Golden Thread, does not forbid such relationships between its members. However, the problem was that Luke treated her specially from the very beginning, so he immediately made her one of the commanders of the clan's squad. At the same time, the first thing he did was give her the same salary as the leader, although she was a new recruit. This kind of decision puts many lives at risk because the commander must be a competent person. Lionel immediately experienced great discontent from the female part of the clan, and the anger from his fellow clan members was very great. The commander was a young girl who had just joined the clan. The members had no idea what she was capable of and that someone like her was giving orders as a squad commander. If someone could appoint such a commander, then they were not fit to be a commander. Lionel and the other clan members discussed the whole situation and came to the conclusion that nothing good could come of it. Lionel took it upon himself to advise Luke that if he loved her so much, he should leave the clan and get married. However, Luke got very angry. He threw a feather at Lionel and asked him not to interfere in his personal life. Then Lionel turned to Luke and said that he absolutely did not care who he loved or married, because he was even ready to bless Luke for it. However, he wanted to add something, but Luke slammed the table with all his might and ordered Lionel to shut up. He started getting angry and shouting that Lionel lectured him every time like his mother. Lionel bit his lower lip in anger. The protagonist started yelling at Luke and saying that they were the same age, but hypothetically, even if Luke was Lionel's son, he wouldn't have grown up so stupid. Then Lionel called Luke bad. Luke got mad about it. Suddenly, Luke throws the papers at Lionel and orders him to stop. Luke says Lionel is fired and expelled from the Golden Thread clan. Lionel clutched the paper in anger. Lionel held out his hand and told Luke that he had said this many times before, that if he fired him, he would never be able to get things back on track. He would never bring Lionel back into the clan. Luke slammed the door on Lionel. He looked into the distance and then was alone in the room. Lionel thought that this was his second exile. Lionel stood in front of the clan building holding a bag of his belongings. He thought about how this wasn't the first big fight between him and Luke. The Golden Thread clan was founded by Luke and Lionel about 10 years ago when they were still children. Since its inception, Lionel has worked hard to make the clan the strongest. Together with Luke, he learned to wield a sword, which they did brilliantly, and also found themselves on the brink of death and hunger several times. At one point, Luke even wanted to steal a piece of meat from a stranger's fork because he was very hungry. Now the Golden Thread clan is one of the leading clans in the entire city, but 5 years ago Lionel was fired from this successful clan. The reason for this event was Lionel's repeated indications to Luke that he was mismanaging his money. Luke was spending too much on girls and drinks, which made Lionel angry. However, as the clan grew, Luke only spent more money on booze, good food, and girls. Lionel immediately told him off in a rude manner. It was because of this that Lionel was kicked out the first time. However, after 6 months, Luke fell to his knees and apologized to Lionel, then asked to come back. Lionel felt awkward about this. Luke was shedding his tears. Lionel, after all, was the best fit for the role of second-in-command, so he decided to return as an exception. At that moment, Lionel put his hands on Luke's shoulders and smiled. Lionel still had so many things to say to Luke, but he decided to close them all in his heart and return to the clan to Luke. First, Lionel knew that Luke was just stupid, not some kind of villain. At that moment, Lionel thought that he could curb Luke's stupidity and coordinate his actions. Lionel smirked and thought that there were some problems with Luke's coordination, but he was sorting them out as they came up. Lionel looked back at his clan's building and said that he probably wasn't very good at judging people. The fact that they were able to set up next to the Adventurers Trade Association was a testament to the success of the Golden Thread clan. Lionel touched the door handle and thought about how unlucky he had been with his boss from the very beginning. Lionel walked into the association building and thought about the proof. He had been fired twice for stupid reasons. If he continued to be an adventurer under someone else, it would only repeat itself. So he decided to withdraw his application for the adventurer job and apply for another one. Suddenly, he heard the girls screaming for help. Lionel frowned and wondered what the receptionist girl was doing there anyway. At that moment, 3 girls were crying. One girl was embarrassed and asked the administrator girl to have mercy on them and give them 3 more days. Then she asked not 3 days but at least 1 more day. They will do anything. Then there was silence. Lionel stood silently in the aisle and looked at the 3 girls who were pleading with the receptionist. At that moment, the receptionist girl nervously held the girl's hand and remained silent. She felt very awkward. Lionel stared at the girl in silence, then began to turn around and remember what the girl had said about not touching something problematic unless you wanted to become part of it. He mentally apologized to the girl named Jennifer and began to turn around. Suddenly, the young man felt someone's sharp gaze on him. He turned and saw Jennifer's face, who was clearly unhappy that the young man had started to turn around and leave. Lionel felt awkward. He started approaching the girls and asking what they were doing there and whether it was possible that he had gotten to some event. Administrator Jennifer smiled sweetly and told Lionel that everything was not as it seemed. At that moment, the girls turned to Lionel. Jennifer said that the girls were expelled from the guild due to non-payment of the sponsorship fee. Lionel thought about it. He didn't understand how the girls could become adventurers without knowing about the guild's sponsorship program. Even if they had become adventurers a month ago, it was impossible. The Adventurers Guild provided assistance to adventurers. Thus, the expenses of all operations fall on the shoulders of the adventurers themselves. This is called sponsorship fees. Adventurers who do not pay them are naturally expelled. The adventurer will have nowhere to sell the cores that monsters drop, as well as loot from ruins and other places. In addition, adventurers will not be able to receive a request from the guild, thus being stuck in adventurer work, unable to do it. Then Lionel put his hand on one of the girls' shoulder and said that, in other words, they were unable to pay the sponsorship fee. The girl looked at the boy's hand with tears in her eyes. Lionel pulled the girl towards him and asked her casually if they were poor. The girl was very surprised by the young man's abrupt actions, and Jennifer only smiled sweetly and innocently. Jennifer then said she doubted it since the girls had already completed 2 requests. Lionel said that 2 requests in 1 month after becoming adventurers was not a bad result. Lionel said that the girls should have received enough money to at least pay the sponsorship fee. He asks them why they didn't pay it. The girls said that the prize was divided equally between everyone, so there wasn't enough money. Lionel realized that, in other words, they had left it for later and were left penniless at the right moment. The girls were happy, remembering how they had had a great time last time, how they had received the award. Suddenly, Lionel looked at the girl knight crying and holding his sleeve with her hands. She began to cry and ask what they should do. Lionel looked at the girl carefully and then noticed her sword on her hip. The young man asked the girl if her natural gift was really hero. The girl was very surprised by the young man's words. She started waving her hands and talking about how good it was and then asked the boy how he knew about it. Lionel said that most people with the job title of swordsman had the gift of hero as their natural title. The girl was very surprised by Lionel's words. At that moment, Lionel thought that this girl was somehow similar to him. The girl instantly melted into a smile. She pointed to her companions and said that the girl with blonde hair has the profession of priest and her name is Meisha. She has the natural gift of saint. Then she pointed to the girl named Miliaria and said that she has the profession of sage, the natural gift of wizard. They are friends and are sisters. The girl in the wizard's hat said that now was not the time to introduce themselves as random strangers. She had to think about what they should do, because now there was a pressing issue about the sponsorship fee. At this moment, Lionel watched the night girl and thought. He put his hand to his chin and thought that in the group of girls, the hero is at the front and the saint and sage who specialize in support are at the back. He thinks that this is a good balance. Lionel imagines a huge statue and thinks that natural gift is the direction of the highest talents given by God. They are recognized and given by the church at the moment of the decade. Lionel remembers Luke and that girl and then thinks that this is definitely a blessing from God. After all, he has never heard of anyone receiving a natural gift, that is, an ordinary person or a fool. Lionel continued to think about the heroes that are the girl Asuka and his former comrade Luke. He realizes that their company with Lionel's natural gift strategist is the perfect combo. Besides, it is very rare, few can find a good strategist. They are said to have a talent for operational planning, command, and management of an organization. That's why this clan of childhood friends is the perfect combination. The girls not only have a natural gift, but also a perfect mental connection. This expands Lionel's range of possible strategies. However, Lionel realizes that the girls are clearly lacking a leader who could effectively combine their strengths. Lionel notices Asuka starting to cry again and asking Jennifer for help and realizes that she is doing it again. Lionel understands that it is worth being honest. Such a strong friendship has a lot of bad sides. For example, it is the distribution of all the money between them. They do not manage the money effectively, not saving for the development of their clan. Then Lionel realizes that he is thinking about something wrong. He told himself that he will stop being an adventurer, but this is some kind of professional habit. Also, he is not obliged to help them. Suddenly, he notices Asuka's tearful face. The next moment, Lionel notices 3 girls staring at him and realizes he's in trouble. Then the boy suddenly calls out to a girl named Jennifer. Lionel points to the 3 girls and asks Jennifer how much they owe for their sponsorship fee, then says he will pay it. Jennifer is very surprised. Suddenly, Asuka became scared and asked the boy if he really did that and then wanted to call him old man. Lionel noticed this and asked if she really wanted to call him old man. Miliaria told Lionel that he looked so grown up. Lionel turned to Miliaria and asked her if she was really implying his return. Then the 3 of them looked at Meisha, who at that moment turned her head away. Lionel told Meisha that there was no point in looking away. The girl said that don't the other girls realize that Lionel can see right through them. Then the girls approached the young man and in a panic began to tell him that they were very sorry. They asked him not to leave them in trouble and they would do anything. Lionel was very embarrassed and wondered if the girls were really adventurers and not girls of easy virtue. Then he felt Meisha's lush form in his hands. He looked at her innocent face, which read that his actions were unforgivable. Lionel screamed and said that he would not leave the girls, and then asked them not to put their forms in his hands. Jennifer asked the young man if he was truly confident in his actions. Lionel said that today was his plan to end his career as an adventurer. Replacing him with newcomers was his final act of service. Lionel looked sadly into his money bag. Lionel knew he couldn't just go back and get the money he'd left behind in his former clan. Lionel clenched his fists. He looked at the worried Jennifer and knew he needed to find another job soon. Suddenly, Lionel pointed her finger at Asuka and turned to the young man. Lionel turned to the girl and asked her what the problem was. He said that he had already paid their sponsorship fee, so they should try to pay it themselves next time. He stroked Asuka's head. The girl looked askance and thanked the young man. Then she turned to Lionel and asked if his natural gift was really a strategist. Lionel looked back at the girl and nodded. Asuka said that was probably true. She had heard that Lionel wanted to stop being an adventurer, but it was such a rare gift. She thought it was such a waste of a talented adventurer. The girl felt awkward. Asuka then smiled and asked Lionel if he would be willing to join their clan. The girl beamed and radiated a ray of hope. Lionel thought for a moment, then asked the girl why she thought that. Asuka said it was because the boy had helped them when they were in trouble. Lionel said that wasn't a very good reason. Asuka said that they became adventurers to help those in need. That's why she wants Lionel to come along with them. Lionel looked closely at Asuka's face and thought that she really did look like a hero. He remembers his past time with Luke and thinks that he was either born under a strange star or that the strategists have a close connection with the heroes. Then Lionel sighed and said that for the record he wanted to clear something up. He said he was fired for being picky about everything. Suddenly the girls answered that they lacked this. They have been friends since childhood. In their affairs, they need sharpness from the outside and someone who can tell the truth to the face. Then Lionel hesitantly agrees to the girls' proposal. Lionel extends his hand to the girls and says that he is glad to meet them. The girls took the boy's hand and began to smile very brightly. A little later, in the Adventurers Guild, Lionel was talking to the girls. He told them that he was glad that the girls accepted him, but that he still needed to sort out some issues. The girls looked at the young man with confusion and asked what issues he was talking about. Lionel folded his arms and said that the girls were so poor that they couldn't afford the sponsorship fee. Since he was in their clan and his natural gift was a strategist, they needed to somehow stabilize their funds. Asuka was delighted and said that the young man was a newcomer and wanted to solve such complicated cases right away. Lionel said that first of all he would like to clarify the current situation, and for this the girls should say how much money they currently have. Asuka was very surprised. Asuka awkwardly extended her hand and said that she had 2 silver coins left. Miliaria smiled confidently and said that she had 1 gold coin left. Meisha was surprised and shook her bag. She asked the girls if they really had any money. Lionel folded his arms in disgust and asked Meisha what she had spent all that money on. Meisha smiled and said that she liked to eat well on her way to church. The girl began to imagine wonderful dishes. She turned to Lionel and asked him if he would eat a delicious steak that also smelled delicious. Lionel said that the smell was certainly tempting, but there had to be a limit to spending money. Lionel looked at the girls and said that the money the girls had would only be enough for dinner tonight. Asuka suddenly remembered that that was exactly why they had come to the guild. Lionel felt angry and suddenly heard stomachs growling. He thought that, in other words, these girls had no idea they were going to be kicked out. They had just come here to take on some odd jobs. Lionel turned to Jennifer and asked if there were any urgent extermination requests. Jennifer began looking at something in her notes. The girl then said that there was a task at Hayden Farm. She explained that the farm had been attacked by goblins a lot lately. Given the timing of the request, Jennifer wouldn't be surprised if the goblins have already affected not only livestock, but people as well. Lionel looked at the task component carefully. He agreed and said that they would take on these tasks. However, he realized that he had accidentally almost written the name of his former clan. Lionel turned around and asked Asuka what their clan was called. Asuka smiled and said that their clan was called Hope, and said that they don't let promising newcomers pass. Lionel thought that this was a strange name. Even though it had been a month since their clan had been formed, he still managed to laugh at the newcomers after all this time. Some time ago, the boys came to the right place and found goblins. Lionel said that there were 4 of them so they could easily deal with these monsters. Lionel asked the girls not to let down their guard. He looked at the goblin and said that you can't underestimate an opponent, even if it's just 1 goblin. Of course, if a person were to face 1 goblin head-on, he would hardly be harmed. Suddenly, Lionel turned around and said that the worst thing about fighting goblins is the element of surprise. They walked along the forest path. Suddenly, Lionel felt a lot of eyes. The girls were already preparing to fight. Lionel rushed forward and said that the girls should fight them as usual. He would watch them and give instructions based on their characteristics. Then Asuka suddenly jerked and ran into battle. The girl shouted that she understood. Lionel was surprised by the girl's actions. Lionel was surprised and asked the girl what it meant. He remembered that he forgot to tell the girl that goblins attack in groups because they are very weak alone. Asuka ran straight towards a bunch of goblins. Lionel thought about how great a hero she was, but she should never run headlong alone. Lionel grabbed his sword and shouted at the girl, asking if she was normal. He asked if he really was wrong to talk about teamwork. He was about to take out his sword, but Milia stopped him. The girl smiled and placed her hand on the young man's hand. Miliaria smiled and told the protagonist that it was okay since he was supposed to watch them fight normally. Lionel was surprised, then looked at Asuka and said that it was right. The next moment, Asuka was attacked by a vile goblin from behind. However, Asuka jumped up sharply. She swung her sword and landed right above the goblin. The goblin was surprised when he didn't see the girl under his attack. Asuka screamed and delivered a sweeping vertical attack to the goblin. The goblin screamed in pain. Lionel watched Asuka carefully and thought that this was a wild and reckless way to fight without any tactics, but Asuka's movements were beautiful. Suddenly, Asuka was attacked by goblins and injured. Lionel realized that the girl was trying to dodge critical attacks, but if this continued, it would be very bad. Lionel realized that the girl would get very tired. She would no longer be able to dodge so skillfully, and now she was only busy with defense. Suddenly, he notices a goblin behind Asuka. The boy screams and says that the goblin attacked the girl from behind. Asuka is surprised and starts to turn around. The next moment, the goblin hit the girl. She flew into the air. Lionel was very scared. He screamed the girl's name. At that moment, Asuka fell to the ground and blood came out of her mouth. The next moment, Meisha used her long-range recovery skill and sent her power directly into Asuka's body. The girl began to heal. Lionel realized how these girls usually fought. He thought Asuka had been knocked out, but it was a calculated move to create a moment to recover. He realized that if that was the case, then Miliaria should have acted during this time. The next moment, Miliaria used a magic pool. The goblins were struck by a huge magic power. Miliaria looked and said that there were 12 seconds left until the end of the attack. Asuka was happy and said that she understood everything. The next moment, the girl rushed to the side and prepared for battle. Meisha turned to Lionel and said that this was their winning strategy. Lionel started yelling at Meisha and saying that even if this was a winning strategy, they were very lucky that they had been able to win all this time. Asuka takes the initiative and charges in alone, gathering enemies around her. When her spells are recharged, Asuka falls into another country, Meisha heals her, and Miliaria strikes the gathered crowd of enemies. Asuka then charges into battle. The final step is to repeat this pattern until they have eliminated their opponents. Lionel believes that the girls do not have the stamina to fight against such tactics. The next moment, Lionel launches his attack at one of the goblins and destroys it. After a while, Asuka sighed and said that this fight was very tough. She was very tense. Then suddenly the girl noticed a huge number of goblins near her. She screamed in horror. The girl closed her eyes and covered her head with her hands. The next moment, all the goblins were destroyed by Lionel's hands. Suddenly, he said that he was still good. Asuka was very surprised by what she saw. The girl touched Lionel with her back and shuddered. Asuka called Lionel and was surprised. Lionel said that the girl should look only forward now. She should not think much, but should fight. Asuka smiled and agreed with the boy, adding that they were now comrades. Lionel ordered her to shut up and go into battle. Lionel saw a goblin. He shouted and called Miliaria, then said that the goblins were starting to run away, so the girl should chase them with magic. Miliaria agreed. She used a magic bullet. However, right behind the girl was a goblin who was heading straight for her. Suddenly, Lionel called Meisha and ordered her to protect Miliaria because goblins were running towards it. Meisha immediately killed a goblin who was heading straight for Miliaria. The girl agreed and said that she understood. At this time, Asuka defeated the last goblin, who let out a heart-rending scream. Suddenly, Asuka was surprised and asked why when Lionel joined them. They won in about 30 seconds, definitely. She didn't understand why this had happened or what had happened. Lionel exhaled and looked at the huge moon. He thought about when the promising newcomer turned into hope. Meanwhile, in the Golden Thread clan, Luke approached a girl named Fina and asked her if she wanted to try out for the clan's vice commander position. The girl was surprised and asked if this was really so, and then asked Luke if she could handle it. Luke agreed and said that even a fool like Lionel could handle the job. Fina said that Lionel was a great man, and wasn't he? Luke wondered if Lionel was really that great. He remembered how Lionel had told him to keep all his receipts and bills and to look after his appearance and not to drink in the evenings. He couldn't believe that Lionel was that great. Luke told the girl that Lionel was very incompetent, so he could be replaced by almost anyone, but he had no one to replace the girl Fina. The girl was very touched and said that she would try her best then. She asked Luke if he would help her. Luke agreed and said that the only thing she needed was to move the girl's desk to her new office. At that moment, two young men were standing right under Luke's office. The fair-haired youth said that their conversation could be heard on the first floor. the dark-haired youth said that it was all over. The fair-haired youth told his friend Nicole not to say such nonsense. He asks him if he remembers how it was 5 years ago. They did a great job then. Nicole said it was hard back then, right after the vice commander left, but the fair-haired boy didn't notice that things only got better with his return. However, it wasn't just because the commander was remorseful. Lionel had come back for all of them. The fair-haired boy said that those were terrible times. He thought that their clan would cease to exist. Nicole agreed and added that it seemed like that was the first quarrel when Luke and Lionel had such a big fight. Nicole thought that even then, 5 years ago, everyone believed that the bond between brothers who shared joy and sorrow was not so easy to break. However, remembering Fina, he realized that between the two brothers there was another person, significant to one, who would have thought that Fina would ruin everything. Nicole said that if this continues, then thanks to the new vice commander, things will become even worse than they were 5 years ago. The comrade asked Nicole to stop talking about it. He can't wait for the commander to finally understand everything, but until that moment life will be almost unbearable. He understands that Commander Luke is too hot-tempered and narrow-minded and also takes on too much. That is why he desperately needs a second-in-command like Lionel. He is happy and says that this is why he will be looking forward to one of them apologizing to each other soon, and with the return of the vice commander everything will fall into place. Nicole agreed. He said that until then, of course, we would have to wait. The fair-haired youth said that they would continue to fulfill requests and that someday it would happen. Nicole thought that only last time Commander Luke apologized to Lionel and he returned, but would it be the same this time? The next day, a small pot hung over a small fire with some food already simmering in it. Lionel sat by a small basin, trying to wash a piece of cloth. It was located next to a small house which was located near a small stream. Lionel thought the lookout was very good. He thought that maybe he should wash his sheets too. At that moment, the doors of the house opened right behind the boy. Asuka appeared and called Lionel to look at something. Lionel screamed because he was scared. The boy asked Asuka why she called him so abruptly and why she couldn't have quietly gone outside. Asuka called Lionel mom and asked him for forgiveness. Lionel screamed and asked why the girl called him that. Asuka showed the clan emblem on her clothes and asked Lionel if it really made her look better, then said that she embroidered the emblem herself. Lionel looked at the girl in surprise and agreed indifferently, then added that the girl clearly looked better that way. Asuka told the boy that when he praises a person, he should express more emotions and love at least. Lionel was wringing out the laundry and asked Asuka what she wanted from him now. Then Lionel said that washing was more important than love and emotions because he wanted to sleep on clean clothes. Asuka turned around and pouted her lips, then agreed with the boy. Lionel began to shake the cloth and thought about Asuka being a problem girl. However, the reason he does all the housework appeared a few days ago. When the boys finished fighting, Asuka said that they could finally return to the clan's home. She didn't expect that after all this they would receive so many requests. Lionel told the girl that they had no choice because next time they couldn't afford to miss the sponsorship payments. A little later, Lionel said that they had been walking for a very long time and would soon be in the suburbs, so he did not understand how soon they would reach the clan's house. Asuka said that they were already close and all that was left was to walk along the river. Lionel thought that the location was certainly not close, but at least the house was along the river. Finally, Asuka pointed towards the house and said that they had arrived. She showed the clan house, which was in a terrible state, and told Lionel welcome to the Hope clan house. Lionel was very surprised when he saw all this. Lionel asked if it was really a house. He didn't understand what it was. At that moment, the girls went to the house and shouted that they wanted to take a bath. Lionel asked the girls where their bathroom was, but a huge pile of clothes flew into his face. The girls turned to Lionel and asked if he would come with them. They were going to swim right in the river. Lionel began to unpack his things. At that moment, Asuka told the boy that this place was amazing. Lionel began folding the girls' clothes. Asuka continued, adding that they had just gotten a half-ruined and abandoned watermill and they didn't have a kitchen, so they usually ate outside. Lionel was simply taken aback. Asuka was saying at this point that even if they had a kitchen, none of them knew how to cook. Lionel was simply astonished. He screamed and told the girls to at least have some decency to be ashamed. A little later, he began hanging the washed laundry on the lines. Lionel hung out the laundry and began to cook. At first, the young man organized a kind of clothesline and kitchen to improve his living conditions. He thought the girls had grown up in an orphanage just like he and Luke had, so he knew they just needed a roof over their heads and somewhere to sleep. However, he understands that this is not the way an adventurer should live. At this moment, Lionel was stirring the food in the pot. The young man understands that they need to eat well, and sleep on clean grounds. Lionel tastes the food and tries to figure out if he salted it well. At that moment, the girls were rolling some huge pot. Meisha said that they finally brought the item. Miliaria sighed and said that it was hard for her. She added that physical tinder is hard for wizards. Lionel walked up to the pot and said that this would be enough. He had already started to say what he would do with the device, but suddenly he noticed a strange expression on Meisha's face. He asked the girl what was wrong with her face. Meisha looked terribly hungry. Meisha said her mouth was watering just thinking about how many servings could be made in such a large pot. Lionel said it wasn't for cooking. Then the young man began to collect stones in a circle. Then he puts this huge cauldron right on these stones. The girls are surprised. Then he says that if you light the wood under a huge cauldron, you will have a real bath. Miliaria smiled and said that bathing in warm water was just perfect. Lionel was surprised and asked the girl about what she said. Suddenly, he noticed Meisha's expression and asked the girl why she was so fussed. Meisha began to panic and tried to say something. Meisha said that she had bought a lot of meat today because she thought it was not a cauldron but a very large saucepan. Lionel got angry and asked the girl if she had really spent all her money again. Asuka suddenly appeared and told Lionel that she had spent the money too. The girl said that she spent all her money on a beautiful embroidery on her chest. It was this embroidery that cost her all her money. Lionel realized that he would not be able to return to the clan home for some time. After a while, the voice of Miliaria, who used the magic bullet skill, was heard. At that moment, Asuka rushed forward, dodging Miliaria's skill. Suddenly, Miliaria's attack almost hit Asuka. The girl was scared and pressed herself to the ground. Lionel noticed this and shouted at Asuka, saying that she should always move approximately at least leaning on the line of fire of Miliaria. Asuka agreed with the boy and then rushed into battle. She ran with some kind of incredible speed. The wolves were very scared when they saw Asuka rushing. Lionel smiled and looked confidently towards the girl. After a while, Lionel also darted to the side and ran straight after the girl. Asuka smiled when she saw Lionel next to her. Suddenly, Lionel was next to the wolf and Asuka was behind him. The boys started circling around the wolves, making them dizzy. Miliaria held her staff out in front of her and used her magic bullet summoning skill. In an instant, the area next to the two wolf monsters exploded. The monsters were very scared. Finally, the command came from Lionel that it was time for them to move. The wolf monsters were terribly frightened. Lionel turned to Asuka and said that they had to go already, so he asked the girl not to lag behind him. Asuka smiled and answered the boy that she understood everything. Lionel looked at the girl and smiled. He thought that he was already starting to get used to all this. Suddenly, the pair of girls and boys rushed from their place. Lionel thought that their recent battle with the goblins had finally borne fruit. They shouldn't be doing quests relying on bait since the chance of casualties was so high. Lionel believed that the best course of action for an adventurer was one that would result in no casualties. While Lionel was thinking about this, Asuka had already attacked the wolves. Suddenly, the young man called Miliaria and shouted at her to begin the spell. The girl positively agreed with him. The next moment, from afar, Miliaria used the magic bullet skill and aimed the fire straight at the group of wolves. A huge explosion was heard. Suddenly, right behind Miliaria, there was a huge wolf. The girl did not notice it, but at that moment, Lionel shouted Meisha's name. The girl instantly dealt with the wolf that was attacking Miliaria. After her successful attack, Meisha began to pray and say that even though it was a sin, she completely surrendered to the supreme god in service. The next moment, she used long-range recovery to relieve Asuka's health. The girl turned around and smiled and praised Meisha for her good work. The girl was completely healed by Meisha's powers. A little later, Meisha turned to Miliaria and asked her if Asuka was really no longer injured. Miliaria smiled and positively agreed with Meisha's assumption. Lionel looked at the girls at that moment and thought that it was a very simple move in tactics, but it was thanks to Meisha, who could be in the front or in the back line, that she could fight calmly. Lionel thought that commanding girls was the same as resigning. A little later, closer to the night, the guys drank to the excellent execution of the assigned task. They raised their mugs upwards. Asuka hugged Meisha and happily said that she was very glad that the meat the girl bought was not wasted. Lionel looked at them and said that they were poor, so they could not afford to throw away food. Lionel then looked at Meisha, who was devouring a piece of meat, and said that he found it very interesting that the girl ate so much but did not gain weight. Asuka came up to Meisha from behind and said that all of Meisha's accumulated fat was going into her curves. The girl continued to eat the meat at that moment. Lionel continued to sit opposite the girls and thought that for some reason he now considered these girls as daughters. Suddenly, someone's voice distracted the young man. Miliaria said that thanks to Lionel's appearance, their team could defeat more than 30 monsters. Lionel continued to dig into the fire and replied that only in the fields and on the roads. He also said that they only fight on battlefields that are convenient for them. Asuka and Miliaria froze for a moment and looked at Lionel. Meisha continued to eat the meat when Lionel said that he was still happy to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Lionel froze and there was silence. Lionel said that the reason they were always victorious was because they always fought in the open during daylight hours. There were other aspects, of course, but those were the most important. He leaned down and said that the most frightening thing about monsters is that they attack suddenly and unexpectedly. Asuka and Miliaria tensed up and looked at Lionel. Suddenly, Lionel put his hand forward with a branch and with an angry face said that the man was just sitting there, and then a monster jumped out of the bushes. He looked at the frightened girls and asked them if they were really scared. Sometime later, there was a terrible rainstorm. Lightning struck the mountain. Someone shouted to Luke that the road was blocked. A huge pile of stones blocked the path of the horse-drawn cart. The man shouted that they had no other choice, so they had to go around. Luke was about to agree that they needed to go around, but someone shouted that they wouldn't be able to do it because they couldn't even move from the spot. Then Luke cursed and then agreed and said that they were in a little trouble, but it was okay and they could go home. Suddenly someone said that if Lionel was here, they wouldn't be in such a mess. Luke heard this, he turned around and became very angry and then asked his comrades about what they had just said. The two young men were very frightened and said that they had said nothing of the sort. Luke became angry and said that he did not wish to hear anything more about Lionel. At that moment, Fina looked out of the carriage and addressed Luke. The man clenched his fists. At this time, Lionel was in the Adventurers Guild, trying to decide on the next quest for his party, so he looked very tense. Jennifer looked at the young man uncertainly. Lionel thought for a long time. No one dared to approach the notice board either. Suddenly, Jennifer turned to him and said that the other adventurers were a little upset that the young man was standing in front of the notice board for so long. Suddenly, Lionel asked Jennifer if there were any interesting requests. Jennifer answered hesitantly that there were hardly any interesting requests for Lionel. Lionel muttered something about exospores. Jennifer didn't understand and asked him about it again. The young man said that he wanted to find a request that would allow him to get a reward so that by winter he would have a warm and cozy house. Jennifer replied that she understood the young man and then asked how about mapping a recently discovered archaeological ruin site. She also added that the request was from an aristocrat. Lionel reached out to the girl and said that this was a very good idea, so he agreed to carry out this task. Lionel said that he loved Jennifer so much that next time he could treat her to something. Jennifer said that she did not need it. She also added that the young man was now in the house of the Hope clan. She also knew that he was far away and he himself had problems with money. She also said that the clan members are not just poor. They are more like beggars, so Lionel should feed himself better. Jennifer also said about the fall of the second-in-command of the prestigious Golden Thread clan in all its glory. She asked Lionel if he knew what rumors were going around about his famous clan. Lionel inquired about the rumors. Then Jennifer approached and whispered in the young man's ear that the Golden Thread clan had failed to fulfill the request. It seemed that the transport of supplies along the dangerous route to the capital had not been completed in time. Lionel asked how late they were. Jennifer replied that she had heard that they were about 3 days late. Lionel got angry and asked about the 3 days. Jennifer agreed and said that in their report they said that they had to go around because of heavy rains. Lionel added that this was not the real reason. He thought that the cargo carried by the Golden Thread clan was most likely military urgent delivery grade. Given the time of year, they should have predicted in advance that it might rain. Lionel said that failing to properly fulfill such an important request would not be dealt with a simple apology. The clan would definitely lose the trust of its customers. Lionel looked sad. He tusked and said he was curious about what had happened in their clan, though he added that it was none of his business. The young man then turned to Jennifer and said that he was done with signing the assignment and then asked if there was anything else he needed to do. Jennifer agreed and said that everything was fine. Lionel headed for the exit. Jennifer called out to him. But the young man stopped, then turned around and apologized to the girl. She said that she had no desire to interfere in the affairs of another clan. A little later, Lionel wondered what Luke was thinking. He had to take care of his reputation and clan members first. Walking through the streets, Lionel was noticed by other people. They began to whisper that Lionel was not the vice commander of the Golden Thread clan, but another person said that their vice commander now was not a girl. They recalled her name and then realized that the clan's vice commander was named Fina. They said that the clan members were unhappy with the leadership. There was a threat of rebellion or even the collapse of the clan. It was time for them to make some money from this. After some time, Lionel returned home to the clan. The girls began to greet him happily. Asuka asked about what requests they received and whether it was possible that they would go to kill the Demon King. Miliaria asked about how much money they would be given for it. Lionel asked the girls to calm down and go away because they came too close to him, so he was embarrassed. The young man also said that when they all gather in one place, the floor in the building falls apart. After a while, Asuka sighed loudly and asked Lionel if they were going to destroy monsters again. Lionel was unpacking and took away that this time it was completely different. This mission was aimed at some kind of reconnaissance. Asuka pouted and said that making maps was boring and uninteresting. Lionel replied indifferently that it was. He looked at all sorts of items and added that this was like a preliminary reconnaissance in preparation for a full-scale search, so it was not the coolest and best request. However, he explained that it was a useful activity in its own way, because unexplored places could contain untouched treasures. Asuka was surprised by the young man's words and asked again about untouched treasures. The girl got into a fighting stance and said that it meant there could be untouched monsters. Lionel thought that Asuka was addicted to fighting and getting treasures. Lionel agreed and said that there might be monsters there, so they should be well prepared for any contingency. Miliarius thought about contingencies. Miliaria shrank and got scared. She said something about monsters being too dangerous or something like that. Lionel agreed. Milia shrank and said that's how it works. Lionel thought about it and realized that his joke must have scared the girl very much the other day. He remembered when he said that a monster suddenly jumps out of the darkness. Sometime later, Lionel and the girls came to some ruined structures. Lionel said that they had come to the ruins of a city and that people had obviously lived there at one time. Asuka laughed and said that her hands were itching. Lionel turned to the girls and said that since there were many blind spots here, they needed to be even more careful. He suggested that the girls form a line first. Suddenly, Asuka raised her hand. She screamed that she would go first. Lionel refused her and said that she would not go first. Asuka was surprised and asked why she didn't go first. Lionel said that this was the girl's first request for research. He asks her how she plans to proceed and if she plans to take the lead again. Asuka replied that she would do as usual, which was to go forward and forward only. Lionel agreed and then asked the girl what she would do if she ran into a trap. Lionel said he was an experienced researcher, but without looking inside, he couldn't even guess what era of technology was being used here. So safety first. Asuka suddenly said that she understood that the boy was worried about her, but she asked him to start trusting her more often. The girl said that she trusted the young man, so moving forward she would listen to his instructions. Meisha and Miliaria looked at the girl silently. Lionel sighed and thought that the girl was right. Lionel thought that the girls were growing up slowly, but the boy agreed, and then told them to leave the leadership and strategy to him. They began to move through the ancient ruins. The boys were very careful. Lionel brought up the rear and looked around very carefully. Asuka was in front of everyone. She held her sword with both hands and said that there were no monsters in sight yet. Lionel looked around carefully. Suddenly Lionel said that it was too quiet here. He thought that the monsters here must be very smart. The girls continued walking forward and did not look back at the boy. Asuka turned towards the boy and then said that everything was fine. She asked Lionel not to be afraid because she promised that she would not let her guard down. Lionel called Asuka commander and said that they were counting on her as a commander. At this time, Miliaria walked with her head down and thought of a very smart monster. Miliaria started to panic a lot. She thought that everything was fine and Asuka was in the lead now. She thought that she would be slashing monsters as usual, and Miliaria would be supporting Asuka with magic bullets when she missed. Miliaria continued to think about her own thoughts when suddenly something moved in the corner behind the building. Asuka instantly clasped her sword with both hands. The next moment, Asuka swung her sword and launched an attack straight at another monster that appeared from around the corner. However, Asuka was very surprised by what just happened. Miliaria didn't understand what was happening, so she asked Asuka what happened and why she reacted like that. Asuka shouted to keep her distance from this monster. At that moment, the monster struck the place where Asuka was. At that moment, Asuka jumped into the air. Asuka shouted to Miliaria that the monster was right behind her. Miliaria was very surprised when she realized that there was a monster behind her. Monstro was shaking all over, but he reached straight for Miliaria. The girl was holding the staff at that moment and did not understand what was happening. The girl was surprised and then began to turn towards the monster. She asked what Asuka meant. At that moment, Asuka grabbed Miliaria by the shoulder and shouted her name. Asuka pushed Miliaria aside and ordered her to go back. The girl was scared at that moment. Asuka rushed forward to attack the monster. Asuka jumped into the air and said that if she couldn't cut this monster, she would just chop it into pieces. The girl was already swinging at this moment. Asuka then tried to strike, but she couldn't cut the monster in half. Asuka was very surprised that she couldn't cut this huge monster. She jumped back from the monster and shouted that it was a magic puppet and that it would take a lot of strength to cut this monster down. Then Asuka realized what she had just said and realized that she needed more power. Asuka immediately looked at Miliaria. The girl was very scared at that moment. Miliaria was shocked because Asuka's attack didn't work. She looked at the monster and realized that she was seeing a magical puppet for the first time. Asuka tried to say something to Miliaria, but the girl was looking at her staff and shaking with fear. Suddenly, Miliaria shouted and used the magic bullet skill. Asuka was very surprised because Miliaria pointed the staff towards her. Asuka screamed and called Miliaria's name. She tried to dodge the magic bullets. Then the girl shouted that she needed support with magic, but the Miliaria simply attacked everything in one direction. However, the attack did not affect the puppet in any way because it was completely unharmed. Miliaria was very scared because she realized that her magic attack did not work on this monster. The girl began to cry. Asuka was surprised that Miliaria's attack didn't work. Meisha also looked at the monster with tension. Lionel knew that something was wrong with Miliaria, so he started to reach out to her with his hand. Lionel grabbed Miliaria by the shoulders and called the girl by name. Suddenly she became scared and screamed. She turned towards Lionel and began to use her magic. Lionel was also scared. The protagonist put his hands forward and asked the girl to calm down. Miliaria realized that it was Lionel, so she stopped using her magic. The boy turned to Meisha and Asuka and then said that this monster was all over the girls, so they had to bide their time. Meisha said that she understood. Then the girl raised her hand up and she started using her magic and used the Holy Light skill. Suddenly, everything around Meisha started shining. The next moment, Meisha shouted to Asuka and told the girl to use her skill right now. She asked the girl to finish off this monster. At that moment, Asuka's sword began to glow. The next moment, the girl launched a sweeping attack and completely cut the puppet in half. Eventually, the puppet crumbled into tiny pieces. Asuka crouched down as the huge monster exploded right behind her. Asuka smiled and said that it was another victory. Meisha stood next to Lionel and smiled. The young man smiled and told Asuka that she had done a great job. At this point, Miliaria was silent and said nothing. She was very tense and beads of sweat were running down her face. A little later, Lionel approached the girl and asked her if she had calmed down. Miliaria was sitting on the rocks and agreed with the young man, saying that she was feeling much better now. She asked the young man for forgiveness. Miliaria sat sadly. She said that she did not know what to do if she did not follow the steps that always appeared in his head. She introduces Asuka and says that she is not as agile and cannot attack instantly like Asuka, and she is not as attentive to her surroundings as Meisha. The girl introduced her teammates. Suddenly, Lionel put his hand on Miliaria's head and told her not to worry. Soon, the girl would learn to deal with unforeseen circumstances. Lionel said that it was difficult for wizards to match swordsmen in terms of body movement, as they needed to hone all of that. But they are good at something else, although in this regard, the task of analyzing the battle and choosing which spell to use falls on their shoulders. Her fear of real monsters and inability to deal with unexpected situations instantly and efficiently means that an unknown monster is the worst possible opponent for her. Lionel said that the girl just needed to get used to it gradually, and until then she had to get used to it, and until then she had to rely on her comrades. Miliaria giggled. Lionel wondered if this was too intrusive towards Miliaria. Suddenly Asuka appeared, shouting Lionel's name. She was happy. Asuka said in a frightened voice that they had a problem of catastrophic proportions because Meisha was very hungry. Meisha turned to the young man with her last strength and said that she would not last long. The girl's entire face was covered in sweat and drool was flowing from her mouth. Lionel said that in that case he would give Meisha a sandwich with meat, but he made it too greasy, so the girl should not eat much. He gave the girl the sandwich, and Meisha beamed with joy. Miliaria smiled as she listened to Meisha say that she was very tasty. She even confessed to Lionel that she loved him. Lionel was surprised that the girl confessed to him so easily. Miliaria laughed and said that Lionel looked just like Meisha's mother. At that time, Lionel was hand-feeding the girl. At that time, Meisha was eating a sandwich. At that time, Asuka laughed and said that Lionel was hand-feeding the girl. Lionel said that calling him mom was too much, so they could call him brother. Meisha at this point again addressed Lionel as mom and asked if there was anything else to chew. Asuka also called Lionel mom and said that Meisha was feeling much better. Then she suggested that they go back to the research. Lionel asked if they really called him mom because they were orphans. The girls didn't answer. A little later, the magic puppet appeared again. This time, Miliaria was not afraid of this monster, but on the contrary, she used her magical power. The girl was confident in her abilities. At this point, the puppet was out of control. Asuka used her skills and cut the puppet into several pieces and then said that it was very hot due to Miliaria's power. Suddenly, Miliaria told Lionel that it was somehow sad. The young man looked at the girl who was watching Asuka. The girl looked at the ruins of the magic puppet and said that she did not understand why or who they were protecting the city ruins for. She did not understand what the point of all this was for them. Lionel looked into the distance and said that it was precisely because they were protecting the city ruins that the place had not turned into a nest of monsters. And thanks to this, the ancestors could calmly pass on the culture and technology to their descendants after thousands of years. Miliaria said that Lionel was a very romantic person. Lionel asked if that was true. To be honest, they could get the treasures hidden here because they had been guarding them for them all this time. Asuka interrupted the boys and said that these golems and puppets are a bit slow. She thinks it would be more effective to implant more attack modules into them. The girl finds it very boring. Lionel thought that Asuka was addicted to fighting. At that time, Asuka was talking about, for example, shining a laser into their eyes. A little later, Lionel said that they would end the distribution of rewards here. The young man said that he had deducted money from each share for the needs of the clan. He asked that his share not be wasted. All the girls agreed. He also said that tomorrow is a day off for everyone. He asked the girls to have a good rest because they have a lot of work to do again. At that moment, the girls were smiling. Asuka turned to Meisha and asked about going for a walk tomorrow. Meisha apologized to Asuka and said that she would go to church tomorrow. Asuka immediately turned to Miliaria, but the girl replied that she would study in the library. Asuka then shouted and called Lionel, to which the young man sighed and then agreed. Then Asuka was happy and clenched her fists. She said that they would finally go to the city on a date. The girl was very happy. Lionel was surprised and scratched his cheek when he found out that the girl was going on a date. Asuka told Lionel to get ready quickly because she wanted to eat meat. The girl said meat again. Lionel was surprised and asked if the girl was really bitten by Meisha and hoped it wasn't contagious. Asuka said she just liked meat and then laughed. Asuka added that whenever she came to the city, she was always amazed by these big and beautiful buildings. Lionel replied that only the rich could afford to live behind safe walls. Asuka said about safety and understood that it meant there would be no leaks or rodents and also that you could fall asleep without the squeak of rats. Lionel thought that these were sad words. Then Lionel thought about it and said that it would be possible to get a cat. Asuka got scared and asked the boy if he really wanted to cook a cat. Lionel screamed and asked what the girl thought of him. He wanted to get a cat to catch rats. Cats are good at catching rats. The only thing is he will have to feed him too, but at least the rodents won't bother their house. Asuka replied that the young man was right. Lionel suggested that the girl look into a pet store and the girl agreed. A little later, the boys were having fun. Asuka grabbed the boy by the hand and led him to the weapons shop to look for some new goods. After some time, the girl was eating a delicious bun and enjoying this food. Lionel smiled and looked at the girl. Asuka also picked out a cute maid dress and showed it to Lionel, but the boy was embarrassed by the outfit. Then they went to a pet store to pick out a cat, but the cat immediately started scratching Lionel. Later in the evening, Lionel said that they ended up in the guild canteen, accessible only to registered adventurers. At that moment, the waitress's girl was serving various dishes to the guild canteen's customers. Asuka smiled and winked at the boy. She asked if they really ate here because the food was the cheapest. She added that it was as expected of a mother. Lionel asked the girl how long she would call him her mother. He asks her to at least call him brother. Then the young man tasted the fish and said that it was amazing because it was tastier than he expected, and it was probably all because of the spices. He decided that he would have to ask the chefs for the recipe and that would expand his cooking menu. Asuka thought that she had a wonderful mother. Asuka said that she simply adored meat. Lionel told the girl to be careful and then called her a real predator. Asuka said that she would eat the boy because he was so attractive. Then Lionel shouted and asked Asuka not to talk like that while eating. At that moment, Jennifer came into the dining room and was about to go to the bulletin board. She saw Lionel and Asuka. The girl was very excited and it seemed that something terrible had happened. The girl suddenly turned to Asuka and Lionel and then said that they had an urgent request, so she asked the boys if they could go to the guild tomorrow morning. At this time, Luke recalled what happened some time ago. He arrived at the place where he had to submit a request for the Golden Thread clan. The man asked Luke how he could explain this whole situation. Luke, flustered, said he had repeatedly said they were late with the order because of the heavy rain that day. However, the man stopped him and said he didn't care about the reason. He continued and added that one of the leading clans, the Golden Thread, was 3 days late with their work. They apparently lacked the skills to continue serving as suppliers to the royal family. Luke was very surprised. He asked the man to wait and asked if he was joking. He said that they were only 3 days late. However, the man stopped Luke and said that he seemed to be a little confused. The man called the adventurers names and said that they had never even thought about who was responsible for them being able to choke on alcohol for days on end. It was all thanks to the royal protectors. The knights of the royal palace risked their lives to protect them. They don't understand that any war can be won if everything is done in time. The man was very angry. He also added that if the Golden Thread clan had fulfilled their request in time, they would not have lost good soldiers and suffered defeat in the previous battle. The man then said that he didn't think the task was too difficult for one of the leading clans. He decided that there would be no more Golden Thread. The kingdom would no longer do business with them. The man turned around and scratched his beard, then added finally that he hoped he would never see any of the Golden Thread Guild members in the royal capital. Luke was very scared at that moment. He didn't understand how it was possible that the Golden Thread clan could lose its reputation in one day. At the moment, Luke was sitting in his office, drinking alcoholic beverages. He was cursing and saying that just remembering it made him furious. Luke was also angry that they also demanded compensation from the clan. Fina hugged the boy and said that everything was fine because they were just unlucky. She hugged Luke and said that she was sure that they would definitely figure everything out, so she asked the boy not to worry. Luke was grateful to Fina for her support. At this time, the fair-haired youth was telling Nicole that he had offered them other ways to deal with the problem, but the commander had not listened to him. He did not understand whether they really could do nothing without Lionel. He did not know how much longer they would have to wait for an apology from at least one of them. He was incredibly angry and did not understand what Fina was doing. Nicole turned to Joshua and asked him not to be angry. He added that Fina took the place of the deputy, but she did not really know how to do anything. Joshua got even angrier and said that Nicole was as calm as ever. Nicole replied that he had made up his mind. Suddenly, Nicole said that he was leaving the Golden Thread clan. Joshua was incredibly surprised and could not utter a word. Joshua asked Nicole if he was really going to leave. Nicole replied that the Undertaker clan had offered him a position in his specialty, and for a lot of money. He asked Joshua if he wanted to go with him. Suddenly, Joshua realized something. He remembered Luke and Lionel and said that Nicole was absolutely right and the boys would never be brothers again. Joshua smiled awkwardly and thanked Nicole for his constant support. He extended his hand to the boy. The boys shook hands and Nicole said that they would never be like Lionel and Luke. After a while, Lionel and the girls were sitting in a huge caravan of wagons. The flags that brought up the rear were those of the royal family. In one of the carriages sat Lionel, Meisha, Asuka, and Milieria. Asuka turned to the young man and asked if they really needed to enter this strange fight they had been invited to. The girl was tense and asked if they would really fight those who rebelled against the royal family. Milieria heard this and even became scared. Lionel was very serious. He agreed with the girl and said that they had to deal with the group of rebels who had fled to the mountains. He said that the enemy was ordinary people. Milieria jumped up and then shouted that everything was completely wrong and that these were not people, but creatures that they called rebels. The girl realized that she had been very noisy and sat down. Lionel apologized to them and said that he needed to somehow calm the girls down before killing real people. A little later, Lionel asked if the royal family's order was really to eliminate the rebel army. Jennifer agreed and said that it seemed that there were less than 100 enemies. About 500 adventurers and mercenaries would hunt them in the mountains. Lionel asked if it was really okay to hire weak adventurers like them. Lionel was very surprised. Jennifer smiled and said that their Hope clan had shown remarkable success in monster elimination missions, so she agreed and would like the boys to participate. In the end, Jennifer was forced to hedge her bets by saying that it was a direct royal order. Then, large enough clans and organizations would definitely agree to take part in the order, which would be a great help for the guild. Lionel was very surprised and said that he didn't even know because such things often happen. Jennifer also asked the young man that at least as a sign of gratitude, would the young man not like to invite her to his place and treat her to a barbecue. Lionel said that maybe he would. In the end, the number of opponents was about 100, and the number of adventurers was 500. With all this, there is no problem in focusing on improving one's own skills and capabilities. However, the question immediately arises: gathering so many adventurers for the sake of simple rebels is somehow strange, to say the least. This fact caught Lionel's attention. The girls looked at the young man and could not understand his train of thought. Suddenly, the youth told Asuka and Milieria not to tense up so much, and instead of mentally preparing too much for the mission, they could become more detached and let go of their rationalism for the mission. The youth clenched his hands. Lionel then looked at the girls very sadly and said that until they became at least a little crazy, they would not be able to kill a real person. Asuka was surprised by the boy's words. Asuka then nervously confirmed the boy's words and said that this is why she always fights with murderous intent. She believes that one must be able to manage one's life and delay the moment of death. She also confirmed that the young man had taught her exactly that. Lionel was so amazed by the girl's words that he opened his eyes wide. He was surprised that the girl remembered this. Asuka agreed and said that one must also never let down one's guard so as not to fall into the grave. At that moment, Milieria was shaking from something. Suddenly, Milieria slapped herself on the checks. It hurt a little, but she was trying to bring herself to her senses. Red marks appeared on the girl's cheeks and tears began to form in her eyes. Lionel asked the girl if she was really okay. The girl said that she was completely fine and that the brainwashing was completely complete. Lionel smiled and thought that these girls had become much more mature. His eyes showed complete peace for his comrades. Then he turned his head towards the sleeping Meisha and looked at the girl, wondering if she had really been so mature to begin with. The girl seemed incredibly calm. After a while, Meisha began to pull herself up and say that she had slept very well. Lionel anxiously asked the girl if she was okay now, because soon they would go on a mission where they would have to kill people. Meisha asked the young man with an indifferent face what he meant. She continued and said that their mission was to subdue the rebels, and wasn't that the same as fighting the infidels. Lionel was amazed and thought that Meisha was a genius girl, and then realized that Meisha was exactly 16 years old, just like Asuka from Miliaria. The young man sighed and looked at the girl with concern. Lionel then said that Meisha can always tell him when she is having a really hard time. Meisha said that Lionel is a very caring mother. Suddenly Meisha became very relaxed and said that when the time came, she would give herself entirely to Lionel. The young man did not understand why everything was going in this direction. Suddenly, a cry went out for silence in the ranks. The group of adventurers gathered together to listen. One of the leaders introduced the adventurers to General Kaitos, who would command the entire army. He also warned everyone that he would talk to them about their strategy. General Kaitos said that they would first camp here for the night, and in the morning they would go mountain hunting. He said that 500 men from their royal army had already settled in the Rei region and that all adventurers would be safe today. At this time, Lionel noticed a knight who had run away into the corners. Lionel thought that he seemed to have seen something. He looked at the general and thought that he looked very suspicious and was a sly fox. Lionel called Miliaria, Meisha, and Asuka, then whispered to them to quickly prepare to set up camp, as it would be their starting point for the mountain hunt. After some time, one of the knights reported to General Kaitos that the deployment had been completed, in accordance with his instructions. The reconnaissance team reported positive results. General Kaitos looked at the map and chuckled, thanking the knight for the report. He then said that there was an hour and a half left until dawn, so they should prepare for a sortie. After a while, everything was on fire. Fiery arrows were flying from the sky. People were shouting that the enemy was attacking them. Miliaria, Meisha, and Asuka were standing not far from the attack site, saying that everything was as Lionel had said. The main camp and the area around the supply base were under attack. At that moment, Lionel was silently examining his sword. Asuka was surprised and asked the young man why everything happened the way he said. The girl was very surprised and tense. Lionel said that they had a traitor, that's why everything happened like that. He turned and said that if serious damage was to be done, it was necessary to attack the lead unit, which played a key role in the mountain hunt. The most effective would be to take the headquarters or supply base by surprise. However, this is only if you know the exact location. He had already guessed who the traitor was. They all stood together and watched the huge fire. Lionel grinned and closed his eyes. He raised his hand and said that he knew who the informant was who had heard General Kaitos' speech. At that moment, the young man was imagining General Kaitos himself when he spoke of the informant. At this time, the entire territory where the detachment of adventurers was located was ablaze. All the tents were burning with bright flames. Lionel continued to say that, in other words, the general was not going to organize a hunt in the mountains. In fact, he only announced the information that the adventurers would prepare for a mountain hunt and the regular army would be fortifying itself in the foothills. And that in such conditions the rebel army, inferior in numbers to the kingdom's troops, would win. Lionel smiled slyly, then raised his finger and continued to explain to the girl that in such a case it was necessary to use a surprise attack. This was the only successful option. Also, the general's information strategy was to make people think that a hunt would be prepared in the mountains. The girls were very surprised by what they heard. Asuka, with her mouth open, asked Lionel if it was possible that this was not the way to deal with the rebels. The young man told the girl to turn on her head and calm down already. He pointed to the mountain and said that they had one mountain, and then the young man asked the girl if she thought it was possible to completely surround it with only 1,000 people. The young man added and said that it was practically impossible to surround such a huge territory without blind spots, and if they had done so, one carelessness and they would all have been killed. which would have been very unexpected for everyone. Lionel turned happily to the girls and said that, in other words, the general had voiced the numbers to lull the enemy's vigilance, and they, the adventurers, had been called here not as a striking force, but only as a way to replenish numbers. The girls were very surprised. Asuka asked if it was true that they were called here for the sake of disguise. That meant that no one expected such a development of events. Lionel said that, to put it mildly, it was. The young man continued, adding that this did not mean that the general had not included mercenaries and adventurers in his strategy. It was good to know that he was not just another flower general. Asuka said that she was very angry about this and the general had bet their lives. Lionel replied that the girl was wrong. He smiled and said that the general had taken excellent care of the safety measures for the adventurers, and even in such a situation they had the opportunity to gain benefits. He asked the girls if they understood him. At this point, the knights were fighting the rebels. However, the rebels seemed to be winning as they were overwhelming the knights with numbers. There were dead bodies of once living knights lying on the ground. One man screamed and said that he felt some kind of pressure. The man was very scared. One of the rebels struck his opponent with a spear, which he thrust right into the man's shoulder. The rebel shouted that before they left, they needed to kill as many of the king's knights as possible. The man was shouting at the top of his lungs and ordering them to kill them as quickly as possible. At that moment, General Kaidos was passing by this rebel, who was already reaching for his sword to join the fight. The next moment, General Kaidos cut down the rebels who had just been shouting that they wanted to kill the royal knights in an instant. General Kaidos ordered everyone to calm down. He widened his eyes. General Kaidos shouted that their enemies were dangerous opponents, so the royal knights should not underestimate them. He ordered the royal knights to surround the rebels. At that moment, a rebel warrior appeared behind General Kaidos and rushed straight towards General Kaidos. Kaidos was at that moment ordering the royal knights to surround the rebels and kill them. Suddenly, a huge explosion occurred right behind General Kaidos, which hit the rebel who was attacking him. General Kaidos was very surprised. He turned towards the explosion, which was already sending out small plumes of smoke. Someone turned to General Kaidos and asked if General Kaidos was injured. At that moment, Lionel, Asuka, Meisha, and Malaria came out of the bushes. Lionel said that the adventurer clan Hope would help the royal knights. At that moment, Asuka smiled and turned to the soldiers, saying that they had come to their rescue. Asuka and Lionel stood with their backs to each other. The area was engulfed in flames and rebel soldiers stood next to the boys. Asuka used her sword with ease and defeated her opponents. Lionel did not stand aside either. He used his sword and cut down enemies left and right. The royal knights were very surprised when they looked at Lionel, who cut down the enemies with such amazing ease, as if he were a real hero. However, Lionel missed the blow and the enemy's sword cut his shoulder. Lionel got angry and thought that the royal knights might think so, but there is a catch here too. Firstly, the enemy is definitely lacking calm. In other words, there are many gaps because the calculation of a sudden appearance has failed. There is also another nuance. Now they have Meishi's holy light on the boy's sword and a magical enhancement on Asuka's sword. Lionel thought that it was too early to be surprised. At that moment, Meisha used long-distance recovery and the boy's wounds were completely healed. The next moment, a magic bullet from Miliaria burst into the sky. Everyone looked up at the sky. Meisha ordered Miliaria to continue. The girl immediately used long-range recovery and Miliaria used magic bullet magic. The girls were very confident. There was a huge explosion. Lionel thought that this magical support at a safe distance was very good. He noticed Asuka's happiness and realized that he could definitely fight with peace of mind now that they could always have support. He noticed Meisha and Miliaria, who were very happy and clapping their hands. The young man realized that these two seemed to have everything under control. Suddenly, General Kaidos turned to Lionel. The man smiled and said that they seemed to be having a really easy time fighting. He asked if they didn't think so. The man held his sword and prepared to fight. He turned to the young man and said that they had saved his life, so he was in their debt. Lionel was surprised by the man's words. The young man then smiled and said that he would take it as a compliment, and then suggested that General Kaidos get out of this predicament at once. Lionel continued to fight his opponents and later thought that, however, it seemed that the victory of the royal army was already close. Meisha and Miliaria also used their magic. A little later, General Kaitos said he wanted to know the names of the adventurers. Lionel knelt down and said that they were adventurers from Jeria. His name was Lionel and he was from the Hope clan. The girls also knelt down after Lionel. The young man said that they were his friends and that they were from the same clan. He introduced the girls as Asuka, Meisha, and Miliaria. General Kaitos smiled and said that they were brilliant fighters and that leaving them to continue working as adventurers was a waste of talent. He asked the young man why he should not serve the general. Lionel remained silent. Lionel thought that if he nodded now, he would fulfill his dream of being knighted. Lionel thought back to his past when he read the book. Growing up in an orphanage, he could succeed. Lionel remembered meeting Luke and realized that it was always like this and it was his dream with Luke. Lionel realizes that it was a long time ago. The young man said that it was an honor for him to hear these words from General Kaitos. The young man calls the general his excellency. However, the young man took on the role of teacher of Meisha, Asuka, and Miliaria. The general was very surprised when he heard such words of the young man. Lionel firmly stated that until the girls became full-fledged warriors and revealed their full potential, he had no intention of serving anyone else. General Kaitos was upset. He turned and said that this is how Lionel chose the path of a teacher and not a strategist, as is his divine gift. Suddenly, General Kaitos began to laugh loudly. He said that in that case there was nothing to be done. The man did not seem angry at the young man for refusing his offer to become a royal knight. Lionel smiled nervously and thought how glad he was that General Kaitos was more understanding than the young man had imagined. Then General Kaitos turned to Meisha, Miliaria, and Asuka and said that the girls had a very good teacher, so he asked the girls to be proud of him. The girls smiled and agreed with General Kaitos' words. A little later, the guys returned to the Adventurers Guild. Jennifer told the guys that they received a letter of thanks from General Kaitos. Lionel listened to the girl and added that General Kaitos, in his opinion, seemed to him to be a very conscientious person, but they received nothing but words of gratitude and a letter. Jennifer smiled and said that the boys should be grateful, because it is not every day that ordinary people receive a letter of thanks from such a noble person. Jennifer seemed to glow as she said all this. Lionel replied that he was filled with blessing from this man. Jennifer added that since everything was official and the event had truly benefited the public, the boys' feat would be recorded in history books. The girl handed the letter to the young man. Lionel took the letter and thought that he would not be richer from it all. Then Jennifer told the girls that there were gifts for them. Jennifer gave a magic sword to Asuka, she gave a protective amulet in a beautiful box to Meisha, and a tiara to enhance magic was given to Miliaria. The girls were very surprised and embarrassed by such valuable gifts. Asuka raised her sword up and said that she was now Asuka Blade. Meisha had already put on her protective talisman and said that she would call her talisman Meisha's protector, and Miliaria put on her tiara and said that she would call it Miliaria's talisman. Lionel looked at the happy girls and then said that if they sold all these gifts, they could move from the hut to a more prestigious house. The girls began to scream and cry and then screamed that they would never give up their gifts, so they did not agree. Then Lionel came closer to the exit and asked if they really were going to live in the old hut. He said that if the general found out, he would definitely cry. The girls began to shout that if they sold the gifts, they would be the ones crying and Lionel would cry too. At that moment, Luke appeared in the doorway. He called Lionel by name. The main character was very scared when he heard a familiar voice. Luke looked very bad. He started to approach Lionel and say that he had finally found him. The young man began to retreat from his former comrade. Suddenly, Luke closed his eyes. The next moment, Lionel covered the girls with his body so that Luke would not touch them. The next moment, Luke fell to his knees and screamed that he was asking for forgiveness from Lionel. The young man was very surprised by what he had just seen. Lionel looked at Luke and realized that nothing had changed and everything was exactly the same as 5 years ago. Luke at that moment pressed his head to the floor. He begged Lionel to return to the Golden Thread clan. Lionel thought back to 5 years ago and thought that he was afraid that if he returned, Luke would still make the same mistakes. However, the boy returned to the clan anyway. Lionel smiled sadly because back then he wanted to believe in Luke because he was like a brother to him. He was sure that Luke would improve someday and that Lionel would be able to change him. He hoped that someday it would happen. However, Lionel now understood that he had been wrong then. He had thought that Luke would change someday, but the young man understood that he had been so stupid. Lionel looked at Luke now and asked if it was possible that he had run out of money. Lionel told Luke to use the savings he had prepared shortly before he left. He left this money to make sure he never came back. Luke was very surprised by Lionel's cold words. Luke looked up and then grabbed Lionel. Luke said that he was the boy's best friend and that they were like brothers, and Luke bowed at his feet. Lionel spoke about the family with a cold expression and asked how Joshua and Nicole were doing. Luke was about to say something about those two, but Lionel had already understood everything and said that Joshua and Nicole had left the clan. This was expected. Then he asked about the others and realized that only Luke and his newly appointed vice commander remained in the clan. After Lionel said about Fina, Luke became very angry. Luke immediately stood up from his seat and grabbed his sword. Luke told the protagonist that he didn't really need it. Lionel was surprised by Luke's actions. Suddenly, something interrupted Luke. Asuka asked Luke if he was really going to pull out his sword now. The girl said that he should know that if he did, they would be acting in self-defense. The girl stood between Lionel and Luke. Lionel was very serious. He frowned and looked straight at Luke. At that moment, Luke was very surprised because Asuka, Meisha, and Miliaria stood between him and Lionel. The girls were very serious. Asuka asked Luke if he realized what kind of a fuss he would make if he killed someone in the Adventurers Guild. Luke was scared after Asuka's words. Lionel noticed the girl's shaking body at that moment. He was very surprised when he noticed the trembling in the body of this fighting girl. Asuka was shaking with fear and tension and waiting for Luke's next move. Lionel thought that Asuka was no longer acting like a child. He also looked at Meisha and Miliaria and then thought that this was a really touching story. He looked at Luke and realized that he was the only one who was starting to lose his cool. Luke was trying to figure out what to do now and how to act. The next moment, Luke clenched his teeth. The man turned sharply and silently headed towards the exit. After he left, Lionel extended his hand forward and quietly called out to Luke. His expression was very devastated. Asuka apologized to Lionel and asked if she had done something wrong. Meisha and Miliaria looked at the young man with concern. Lionel patted the girl on the head and said that everything was not like that at all and the girl did very well. He thanked her for her help and rescue. Asuka wanted to continue the conversation and asked the boy if Luke was really his friend from the previous clan. Suddenly, Meisha grabbed the girl by the shoulder and told her to stop asking questions. Asuka turned towards Meisha in fear. Meisha asked Asuka with a serious face if she thought Lionel would look like this if picking on him was the only reason he was kicked out of his previous clan. Asuka began to feel sad, but Meisha looked towards Lionel and said that she was sure that someday the young man would tell them everything. At this time, Lionel was apologizing to Jennifer, who had already called the guards because she thought there was a fight brewing in the Adventurers Guild. Meisha said that even after the story, she wanted the Hope clan to continue to be a haven for this man. Asuka was surprised and very embarrassed. Asuka was embarrassed and said about the shelter. She agreed and said that she wanted it to stay that way. A light breeze blew through the girl's hair. Then Meisha said sarcastically that everything was fine and Asuka herself didn't want Lionel to run away from them somewhere. Miliaria added that she had been getting the feeling that Lionel was paying too much attention to Asuka lately. Asuka screamed and asked the girls what they were even talking about. At this time, Luke was walking through the streets of the city. A terrifying and oppressive atmosphere hovered around him. Some time ago, everyone in the Golden Thread clan was on edge. The clan members begged the commander to finally return Lionel. They shouted that if they continued to flounder in this swamp, they would not be able to pay the country compensation. Another man said that this was exactly it, and in order to continue to be a clan and pay off the debts, all the clan's property had to be sold. Luke shouted that he was already working on this issue. At that moment, Fina was standing in the corner of the room. With an indifferent face, she reached for the butterfly hair clip and took it off. Then the girl put the clip on the table. Luke said that there was nothing to be done. He agreed that he would go look for Lionel later. He promised to fall on his knees and try to bring him back. However, at some point, all the guild members turned around and did not see Fina in the room. Luke was currently walking towards the Golden Thread clan building. He knew it was all over. Luke was just devastated and didn't know what to do next. He looked at his clan's building and understood that the compensation to the royal family for the quest not completed on time would be serious. Even if all the clan's assets were sold, it would still be impossible to pay everything off. He looked at the sign next to the building, which stated that the assets had been mortgaged. Luke walked along a crowded road and thought about how he had nothing left. He had no fame, no property, no friends, and not even a brother. He didn't understand how he should live on and what to do at all. He thought that at least he had Fina left. Suddenly he saw dark hair and beautiful butterflies. Luke realized that it was Fina. However, when he turned around, his gaze was filled with shock, hatred, and incomprehension of what was happening now. Luke saw Fina smiling sweetly. She was beautiful and her smile was very warm, but Fina's smile was not dedicated to Luke. The girl was with an unknown young man and was smiling sweetly at him. The next moment, Fina turned around with fear in her eyes. She felt the brutal danger that was provided to her. Luke at that moment had his blade out. His eyes were filled with rage and anger as well as grief from betrayal. The man quickly walked towards the girl who had betrayed him. The next moment, Luke cut off Fina's hand. The girl was surprised by what just happened. It seemed that due to the shock, she did not feel any pain at all. Luke's eyes were filled with brutal anger. The next moment, Luke was grabbed by the city guards. The man was still struggling to finish off Fina, who was falling to the ground at that moment, bright blood splashing from her wound. After a while, in one of the taverns, a bard was singing a song about what happened at sunset. He said that this is how the butterfly dance ended. People were discussing and saying that they did not think that this poem would be so perfect for the situation with the Golden Thread clan. Another person replied that there were no intrigues or villains in the story, so that's why he wrote it. The men thought there were no villains, only fools and idlers. The man also asked what happened to the leader of the Golden Thread clan. It seemed that he was now facing only the death penalty. The other man replied that he was lucky here. If he had killed the girl, then he himself would have been deprived of life, but as it is, she survived, so the head of the clan will only get off with prison. Since what he had done was a grave sin, he would have to work hard for the rest of his life. The men thought the clan name Golden Thread was impressive, but they also fell to the bottom impressively. After some time, on a beautiful clear day, a small kitten was playing with some garbage that was stuck in a crack in the house. Suddenly, Lionel shouted and greeted the king of the lions. The kitten was frightened by the sharp cry and tensed up. Lionel was happy that the kitten was unable to catch the trash. Lionel said that a kitten should not scratch people, and they got him to hunt rats. Miliaria said that the young man now looks like a father in a family who, among all his relatives, only sees a pet as a comforting companion. Lionel asked the girl to stop attributing non-existent characters to him because it was very offensive. Miliaria said that they were very sensitive. She asked the boy why he didn't go to some sort of casino or fun house then. Miliaria represented bad Lionel. The boy shouted that children shouldn't encourage adults to gamble and girls. Miliaria said he was joking and then turned to the boy and said it would be nice if the boy went out somewhere for a walk because he was disturbing the girl's cleaning. Lionel said that the girl was treating him worse and worse each time. He has no money for parties and he doesn't want to wander around the forest and feed the squirrels. Suddenly, Miliaria noticed a letter lying on the table. She was about to reach for it to read what was written in that letter. Suddenly, Lionel pressed the letter with his hand so that Miliaria could not see what was written directly in the letter. Lionel said that Miliaria must not read this letter. He looked very depressed. The girl was also surprised that the young man took the letter. Miliaria was shocked and said that Lionel had no money. Suddenly she screamed and said that she thought the boy was dressed like that. She imagined the depraved Lionel. She said that the boy was probably going to a club. Miliaria started screaming and said that according to the young man they should show restraint towards the opposite sex, but at the same time he himself goes for a walk to some woman. She says that this is some kind of love letter. Lionel thought about the love letter, then turned around and walked towards the exit. He wished the girl luck with her cleaning. Miliaria asked the young man to wait, but he did not listen to her. After some time, the main character came to the Adventurers Guild. He whispered to Jennifer that he loved her very much. Then the young man asked the girl if he wanted to treat him to a cup of tea. Jennifer disrespectfully pushed Lionel's hand away and said that the boy was much more courageous when he was in the previous clan. The boy felt very hurt by the girl's actions. Then the girl laughed and asked what she wanted to know from the boy, whether he really finally got a cat. Lionel screamed and asked if the girl really wanted to talk about it right now. Jennifer said she was just kidding and then asked the boy if he had been thirsty recently. She added that there was a water fountain at the training ground. The boy remembered and said that there had been a training ground there. Lionel then turned to Jennifer and asked her if she thought everyone had been too cold towards him lately. Jennifer was surprised and said that she didn't think so. She said that in order not to rely so much on Lionel anymore, everyone tries their best to become stronger. The young man was surprised and asked about the girl's words. He started crying and laughing nervously and then said that this meant that soon he would become completely useless to anyone. Jennifer did not understand what the young man meant. She asked what he could possibly be talking about. Jennifer started pushing the boy and saying that if he still couldn't get it, so she asked Lionel to go and wet his throat and then think it over properly. Lionel sighed. After a while, Lionel was drinking delicious water from a fountain near the training ground. The young man was happy and said that he had come back to life again. Suddenly, he noticed warriors who were fighting each other in a training battle. The young man thought that these were some enthusiasts who had gathered there. The young man looked closely at these people and suddenly realized that one of the people training was Asuka. Lionel called the girl by name, but she did not pay any attention to him. At that moment, Asuka rushed into battle. She did not pay attention to Lionel, who was standing next to her. The young man was surprised by the girl's sharp movements as she moved forward. The next moment, the enemy's sword was aimed straight at Asuka's head. The girl noticed the blade approaching her head. However, Asuka was able to dexterously dodge the man's attack, who had already swung his sword, but the girl was already slightly below the level of the swing. Lionel watched the fight between Asuka and the young man carefully. He was very surprised and noticed that the girl's movements were getting better and better with each passing day. The next moment, Asuka swung her sword. She held it with both hands and it seemed to outweigh her, but the girl's face did not express any worries and it seemed that she had everything under control. Lionel smiled as he looked at the girl and realized that after only 3 months, Asuka looked like a completely different person than she had seemed before. Perhaps someday she would even surpass her teacher, that is, Lionel himself. Lionel was watching Asuka's fight with the young man. Suddenly, Asuka noticed someone standing nearby and watching them fight. Asuka turned around and saw Lionel standing nearby and watching the fight. The girl began waving at the young man and calling his name. At that moment, Lionel noticed that right behind the girl, a younger man had already taken a swing and was unable to stop. Asuka wanted to say hello to Lionel, but at that moment, the young man hit the girl on the head with such force that Asuka bit her tongue and blood came out of her mouth. After some time, the guys were walking along the corridors of the Adventurers Guild. The girl said that everything was as she said. Lionel said that rest is also part of training. The girl scratched her head and asked Lionel for forgiveness. However, Asuka smiled and said that she felt herself getting stronger. Lionel sighed and said that he understood the girl perfectly. However, Lionel sadly said that the girl should stop training without his supervision. He asked the girl what would happen to their clan if the girl were to get hurt by accident. Asuka smiled and told Lionel that she understood. Lionel said that the girl called him mommy again. Then he said that the girl should understand that children who do not listen to their parents are punished. Then Asuka turned around and asked the boy if he would spank her for that. Lionel screamed and said he wouldn't do that. Asuka was embarrassed. Then Lionel noticed Jennifer standing nearby, waiting for them. Jennifer just waved sweetly at the boys and then called them to come closer to her. After a while, Jennifer smiled and said that she had a wonderful request for poor Lionel. Lionel replied that although it was true, it only made him angrier. The young man then asked what kind of request this was, that the atmosphere had become so ominous. Jennifer smiled maliciously, but the young man said that he hadn't meant anything like that and then apologized to the girl. Jennifer said that in short, the request was for an escort from their city to the royal capital. Asuka heard the request and was surprised and then asked about the request for an escort to the royal capital. She asked if it was possible that they would be escorting the princess. Jennifer said that they would work as bodyguards for a merchant. Asuka said that it was very boring and then she puffed out her cheeks. Lionel put his hand to his chin and said that it would be nice if they could pick up a few quests in the capital when they arrived, but that was unlikely. He asked why the request was perfect for them. Jennifer replied that the client wanted female bodyguards and the boy had 3 beautiful girls in his clan, so hope was perfect. Lionel thought that this seemed to smell like a very dirty crime. The young man thought that it could be assumed that the request indicated girls, which is a very difficult matter. There is clearly some intent behind this, perhaps even a very bad individual character. Jennifer asked if the guys really thought she hadn't checked. She said it was a shame. The thing is, it was a girl who had left the request, not a man. Lionel realized that everything was clear to him now. The girl trader would obviously feel very uncomfortable in the company of unfamiliar male bodyguards. Jennifer eventually said that after accepting this request from the Adventurers Guild, the Hope clan should set out to complete this quest in 3 days. After some time, a girl named Anita said that she was the representative of this caravan. The girl thanked the guys for agreeing to accompany her to the capital. The young man thought that it turned out that the author of the request was indeed a girl. However, Lionel was not told that there would be other men with Anita. The girl was very tense and seemed very scared. The men were very scary and it seemed that there was something fishy going on. Suddenly, Meisha's eyes lit up very brightly. Meisha herself was frightened by such a surprise. Meisha immediately turned to Lionel and said that she had received a revelation from the Supreme God. At that moment, Asuka and Miliaria shook Anita's hand and smiled sweetly. They were pleased to meet this girl. Lionel sadly asked Meisha if she had truly sensed evil. Meisha agreed that she had. Lionel thought that it was rare for those with the gift of a saint to receive revelation from the Supreme God. However, from its features to sense evil, from the name it is clear that this is some kind of warning that appears very unexpectedly. So Meisha suddenly felt some danger and immediately warned Lionel about it. They watched as the man grabbed Anita's shoulder and it was immediately obvious that the girl was uncomfortable with it. Lionel thought that in any case, even without the warning, it was clear that something was wrong with this situation. Meisha turned to the boy seriously and said that they needed proof. At the moment, it was nothing more than their assumptions. The girl said that she understood. Meisha suggested continuing to pretend they hadn't noticed anything. She would tell Miliaria about everything later. Lionel said that Asuka couldn't sense the mood, her acting was terrible, so they would tell her at the very last moment. The boys looked straight at Anita as she was taking care of the horse. The boys decided that they would help this poor and unhappy girl later. Lionel confidently agreed and told Meisha that he was counting on her help. The young man realized that the girl was in great danger. Meisha smiled and said that it was all self-evident. She knew that Lionel would say that. The girl was glad that the young man agreed with her. They represented the worst, and perhaps Anita was not just bait to lure prey, but something even worse. Lionel looked at the happy and cheerful Miliaria and Meisha, who were walking right in front of the young man. The young man thought about why such a request actually appeared. Lionel continued to reflect on how the journey from Gailey to the capital usually took about a week, but 3 months ago, a major storm had collapsed the main road. It hasn't been fully repaired yet, so you have to constantly go around it, and since it's not a main road, it's not serviced. That's where the main danger lies. In addition, there is not a single tavern along the way, so it will not be possible to stop for the night or to rest. Lionel looked at the map and said that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow they would set up camp, and the day after tomorrow they would set up camp. Her only condition was that they keep the fires always talking and be ready to respond in case of emergencies. The man interrupted Lionel's thoughts and said that there was no need to be so tense. They had done that many times. The man asked the boy to calm down. Lionel said with a hateful smile that they were new adventurers, so they had to be extremely careful. The man told the young man that he was so serious, and now it was clear why his girls trusted him so much. They realized that they could rely on the young man. The man with the strange expression said that Lionel was serious, sincere, and calm. They asked Anita's opinion. Anita heard that they were addressing her, so she shuddered and became frightened. The girl with a sad expression agreed with the man's words and said that she completely agreed with her words, but her face did not express any happy emotions. Lionel looked sadly at the girl, who had already gone to the cart to check if everything was okay with her. Suddenly, the man put his hand on Lionel's shoulder. He smiled and asked the boy for forgiveness and said that Anita was just shy. The boy was very unhappy with what he had just heard. Lionel thinks that the man will show his true colors when they set up camp. The man at that moment told the boys that if they get tired, they should tell him. They will take a good break and the girls will get back on their feet. Asuka agreed. The young man thought that the loss of concentration would occur around the second day. He considered the men skilled. They must have been committing these crimes according to the same scheme for several months. Until now, the girls could not sue the traitors because of their status and influence, and after the crime, because of the impossibility of taking revenge, they simply laughed at them. And if the female adventurer disappears during the request, there will be no investigation. The authorities will not know, and the guild will not send an investigation team. This is the fate of adventurers. Everyone thinks that they died during the mission, and these bad people continue to commit crimes with impunity. Lionel thought about the fact that they would be moving through the mountains for the last 2 or 3 days. The young man was very serious and seemed to have already come up with some kind of plan. Lionel turned his head towards Meisha and thought about how he had already warned Meisha about what might happen. Lionel looked at the girl's sweet face and realized that Meisha was the desired, curvy beauty, so she would be attacked first. Suddenly, Lionel looked back at the other men in the caravan. They were looking at Meisha and couldn't control their emotions. Their mouths were drooling and their cheeks were flushed bright red. A little later, night fell. The man turned to Lionel and said that they had pitched the tent, so it was time for dinner. The man asked the boy to leave the cooking to them entirely. Lionel said that the merchants were tired and should rest. There was no need to be too careful. The men started hugging Anita and said that Anita was the best cook. They said that if the adventurers tried Anita's food, they would lick their fingers. Anita said sadly that she would try to make this dinner unforgettable. The girl was simply exhausted. She smiled with a smile that was filled with self-loathing. Lionel was very surprised when he saw the girl's expression. A little later, guys, if I'm going. Asuka was happy and said that this food looks very tasty. Asuka had 2 plates with food, on one buns with bread and in the other plate there was soup. Asuka told Anita that she was a very nice girl. Anita was surprised by the girl's compliments and she was very pleased with the compliments. Anime said with a sweet and sad smile that cooking for the boys was the least she could do to repay them. Lionel noticed the girl's sad expression and became very wary after the girl's words. Lionel suggested that the girls start eating before everything got cold. Anita was very surprised and a little scared. Asuka agreed and said that they should start eating. The girls tried the food and thought it was very tasty. Anita, however, looked sadly at the girls eating her prepared food. Meisha said that the meat dish was incredibly delicious. Miliaria added, looking at the girl, that Meisha really liked meat. They laughed together and enjoyed the food. Then Lionel brought the spoon with food to his mouth and said that it was very rude to talk with your mouth full. Then he tasted the food. The next moment, the spoon with food fell to the ground. Lionel's hands began to shake. The young man asked what was wrong with his body. Fear appeared on his face. Anita looked sadly at what was happening to the young man. The main character, Lionel, began to fall from his seat and lose consciousness. The plate of food also began to fall. Lionel clutched his heart and felt very sick. The young man fell to the ground. The girls screamed and called Lionel by name. The girls did not understand what had happened. Asuka screamed and called the young man by name. Horror and fear were written on her face. Suddenly, the girl also felt sick. The next moment, they fell to the ground. Asuka did not understand what was happening and what it all meant. Miliaria was also lying on the ground and Meisha was trying to lean on the table with her hands. The men began to laugh at Lionel for being so stupid. They realized that their plan had worked out perfectly. They said, looking at Lionel, that he was pretending to be a strategist or something like that. The man couldn't believe that despite his talent he couldn't foresee this. Another man held a rope and said that they should tie the boy up just in case. The next moment they noticed something. Lionel kicked one of the men with all his might, turning half around. Lionel rolled over with ease and rose to his feet. He turned and shouted at the girls to get going right now. At that moment, Asuka was laughing like a real savage. She was happy that she was allowed to kill. The boys did not understand what Asuka was doing at all. At that moment, someone was approaching him from behind. The girls shouted the boy's name so that he would be careful. Suddenly, Anita appeared from behind and neutralized the man who was about to sneak up on Lionel and neutralize him. The young man turned to Anita and said that the girl had saved him. At that moment, Anime was very surprised that she had been able to resist the men. She held the club in her hands and tried to catch her breath. A few hours ago, Anita was preparing food. She was holding some kind of medicine in a jar in her hands. Suddenly, Lionel came up to her and addressed the girl by name. Anita shuddered at the fact that the young man addressed her. The girl turned around and said that dinner was not ready yet. Lionel smiled and said that he had not approached the girl about that. He just wanted to ask if there was anything he could do to help the girl or not. Lionel said that he usually cooks food for the girls, so he feels a little uncomfortable doing nothing and just waiting for his food to be prepared. Anime winced and told the boy that she understood, but she really didn't need help. Lionel sternly told the girl to stop lying. The young man said that there was no need to hurt anyone anymore, and the girl herself did not need to suffer anymore. Anita held the jar out in front of her and began to cry, looking at this jar. Anita started to wipe away her tears and said that she was very sorry and that all this time she had done incredibly bad things. Lionel said that he already knew everything and that was why he wanted to end it all today. The girl stopped crying. The young man said that he would help the girl and in return she should help him. Lionel took the bottle of medicine from the girl and smiled. It seemed that he had some kind of plan. At this time, the man called Anita and said that she had betrayed them. Then they turned to the adventurers and said that Anita was also to blame for everything. Anta had deceived all the female adventurers. The men began to insult the young adventurers and asked if they really thought they could get away with all this. Then Lionel sat down with the men and said that he did not think so. Lionel looked very gloomy and it seemed that he would kill these men right now. Lionel said that they adventurers always take revenge for their comrades, no matter how many years it takes. If a person fails to achieve his own revenge, he will certainly pass it on to his children and they to their grandchildren. They never forgive offenses. If it becomes known that men are guilty of all these crimes, then the crying adventurers will be avenged and will be able to breathe a sigh of relief. Lionel is sure that the leading guilds of the country should take an interest in the deeds of men. While Lionel was laughing evilly at the top of his lungs and looked like some kind of villain from the movies, Anita was clenching her fists and was very scared. The girl thought that the young man was a good person, but now he was very evil. At that moment, Asuka turned to the young man and asked him what they would do with these bad people. Lionel began poking one of the men with his sheathed sword. The boy said they could simply return and hand them over to the police in the city, or they could continue with their original objective and escort Anita to the capital. Suddenly, the girls started to shine very brightly. With their shining gaze, the girls hinted to Lionel about their further plan of action. Lionel guessed what the girls wanted from him and turned his head away. The young man sighed and said that then they would keep their way as they had originally intended, that is, they would head to the royal capital of Garangren. The girls all shouted joyfully together. At that moment, the sun had already appeared from behind the mountains. After some time, Asuka sat at the reins and drove the carriage. The girl was very tired and said that she was already starting to get used to driving the carriage, as it had been very unusual for her before. Arriving at the city gates, the girl noticed that the gates had not yet been opened. She said that they were too big, but she realized that this was the whole point of the royal capital Garangren. Lionel told the girl that they were almost there. The carriage stopped and Lionel greeted the soldier. The man turned to the young man and asked if they were really adventurers from the Hope clan. It seemed that the boys were already expected in this city. Suddenly, the people heard the knight's words and began to look towards the carriage because they wanted to see the members of the Hope clan. Asuka looked at the people with confusion and could not understand why they were reacting like that to their arrival. Lionel approached the knight and said his name, then added that he was the leader of the Hope clan. Asuka watched as the young man introduced himself to the knight. At that moment, Lionel said that as he had promised, they had caught the criminal who had been constantly terrorizing the adventurers. The young man looked at the men, who were already scared, and realized that they were in trouble. The knight thanked the leader of the Hope clan for his efforts and then said that the garrison commander had a question for the young man. He pointed in the right direction and said that the young man should go along this road and turn right to the third camp. Lionel replied that he understood everything. Lionel turned to Asuka and said that he could handle the rest on his own. He extended his hand and asked Asuka to hand him the reins. The girl was surprised and could not understand what the young man wanted from her. Lionel said that everything was fine, so the girl should rest for a while. They started to enter the city gates and Asuka was very surprised by what she saw. The next moment, the boys entered the city gates. Asuka was very surprised by what she saw. All eyes were on the incoming carriage with the adventurers from the Hope clan. People started to cheer and shout the names of Asuka, Miliaria, and Mesha. The girls were very surprised that people in the royal capital were chanting their names as if they were some famous adventurers. Lionel rode in the carriage and thought about how Asuka, Miliaria, and Mesha were girls who defeated criminals, so they were considered heroines. Lionel looked at the happy girls and thought that this is what their names are, but he is also like that. He also wants to get the attention and pride of the crowd. Instead, other people thought he was the girls' coachman. Lionel was very upset and seemed like a little demon. The young man asked other people to be careful and not to come so close because a carriage was coming. Sometime later, the sun was shining on a beautiful and clear sky, and gentle clouds were floating right above a huge and luxurious mansion. Someone's loud laughter was heard around the area. The man turned to Lionel and said that he, their teacher, was considered a simple coachman. He said that it was worthy of a leader, that is, to give all the glory to his subordinates. The youth said that the man was very cheerful. Then he turned to the man and said that he was talking about General Kaitos, who was laughing very brightly at that moment. The man asked the young man for forgiveness. Then General Kaitos changed the subject and said that the young Lionel had obviously come to his mansion for some reason to see the old man. He said that Lionel had a favor to ask of him. The man asked the young man if he wanted to elaborate. Lionel said that wasn't quite true and his reason was a bit unusual. He wanted to talk about the man who had sent them to the capital. Lionel said he was sure the man had heard of the incident. General Kaitos agreed and said he had often seen in the newspapers that the young man and his clan had achieved great success. That's exactly it. The Hope clan rose in the eyes of the people. The three girls became so popular that they began to be printed in newspapers, but on the other hand, Anita's situation can be described as difficult. Of course, she was shown some sympathy as one of the victims, but she caught too many curious glances, and what she had done also acted as an aggravating factor. The company she belonged to fired her and handed the 7 criminals over to the kingdom. Unfortunately, the company is already under fire from the people and is almost on the verge of bankruptcy. All the employees of the company, for selfish reasons, continue to blame this girl. They told her that it would be better if they continued to suffer everything silently. Then General Kaitos said that, continuing the topic, the man who had caused Lionel a lot of trouble lately and he knew him very well. Lionel told the man that he wanted him to lend him a helping hand. General Kaitos looked thoughtfully straight at the young man. General Kaitos suddenly laughed and said that this request was so small and insignificant. The fame of the young man will continue to grow, so he agrees to fulfill his request. The man also says that it is very pleasant to be in debt to the young man, but sooner or later he will definitely return everything he owes to the young man. Lionel began to smile nervously and thanked the man and said that he would help him a lot, that he was even ready to throw in some extra money. General Kaitos asked why the young man was talking like that. The man asked whether the young man would be left penniless after this whole situation, and now he wanted to throw some money on top of that. Lionel asked if the man wanted to say that he had decided to agree to his proposal. General Kaitos smiled and asked why not. Lionel began to drink his tea nervously. The man said he seemed to remember a few drunks who had spent all their money on funding some trivial thing like that. The man poured tea into Lionel's cup and smirked. He said that they had plenty of time and tea, so he suggested that Lionel talk about the former leader of the Golden Thread clan. Lionel was very upset at this point and looked somewhat depressed. After some time in the prison cells deep in the dungeon, the knight approached the cell Luke was in. He turned to number 214 and ordered him to go out. The man said that Luke had been pardoned. He should go and meet the man who had gotten him out of prison. Luke was very surprised to hear the warden say that he had been pardoned. The man continued and said that the man was allowed to spend half an hour in the bathroom. He had to make himself presentable. Luke didn't realize that he could pardon him. He was very surprised. The man took Luke to the bathroom and said he would be back for him in half an hour. Luke sat in the bathroom and did not understand what was happening and why the attitude towards him had changed so much. Luke shaved and thought that he couldn't believe that he was allowed to shave and wash before he was released from prison. Suddenly Luke heard Lionel whispering in his ear for the man not to do anything unnecessary. When Luke doesn't know how a situation will develop, he shouldn't put himself in a disadvantageous position because that will end badly. Luke was very scared when he looked in the mirror and saw his former friend and brother, Lionel, right behind him. Luke swore and was very upset. He leaned against the sink and thought about how bad he felt. The man put down the razor and said that he couldn't believe he remembered Lionel's words at such a moment. At that moment, a knight entered the room and called number 214, then declared that time was up. Luke was at that moment tidying up his hair. After some time, Luke and General Kaidos were sitting at a table in one of the rooms. General Kaidos turned to Luke and asked if he was really the former leader of the Golden Thread clan. Luke agreed. Then General Kaidos said that Luke had been released from prison. The man added that Luke should be grateful to His Majesty King Morrison for his generosity. Luke did not understand that a man of such status who could appeal to the king for clemency had stood up for him. Luke thought about how he didn't have such acquaintances. He bowed his head and said that he was grateful and happy and also apologized for the inconvenience he had caused. Luke then turned to General Kaidos and asked him if he could ask about the matter of the pardon. Luke asked if this matter of the pardon was based on someone's recommendation. General Kaidos said that it was he who recommended Luke, and then asked the man if there was anything he could be dissatisfied with. General Kaidos folded his arms and asked Luke to stop being so unreasonable. Luke continued to sit and bow his head. Luke thought that he and General Kaidos were strangers, so he had no need to vouch for him. From this, it was clear that someone was behind all this. Suddenly, Kai understood who had pardoned him. He began to smile very angrily and hatefully. Luke clenched his fist and didn't understand why Lionel was feeling sorry for him and what was the point of all this. If he really felt sorry for Luke, then why had he turned a blind eye to the Golden Thread crisis and now was showing condescension and arrogantly extending a helping hand? General Kaidos threw Luke a bag of money and said that there was not much here, but he should take it. The general also added that this money should be enough to get back on his feet for the time being. Luke imagined that Lionel was behind him and giving him this bag of money. He was mocking poor Luke. The man realized that this money was a gift from Lionel. He thought that his former brother and comrade was just mocking him and simply openly ridiculing him. Luke's hands shook as he clenched them into fists. Then he thanked General Kaidos for his generosity. After some time, General Kaidos invited Lionel to his mansion. They then moved their conversation to a small gazebo deep in the garden. General Kaidos said that Luke seemed to understand when he relayed those very words. The man saw Luke's eyes, and it seemed to him that they were like those of a wounded animal that had been cornered. Lionel sadly said that he understood what General Kaidos was talking about. A dark atmosphere hung over the man. He told Lionel that if he were in his place, he would kill him immediately and leave it at that, because he believed that trouble was bound to come from such people. The general told Lionel to be careful because one day his former friend and comrade Luke would come for him. Lionel smiled and said that if that happened, he would simply kill Luke. It would be a kind of correction. General Kaidos was very surprised when he listened to Lionel's speech. The man in shock told the young man that the young man was a strange man. Lionel awkwardly scratched the back of his head and laughed nervously. General Kaidos then suggested going back to the story of the girl Anita. He began scratching his chin and said that the boy wanted the best for her, which was understandable. However, the man asked why the boy didn't just hire Anita into his clan. Lionel began to shake after this question. He said hesitantly and awkwardly that he did not have money to hire someone to the clan. General Kaidos realized that he had touched a very sore point for the young man. He replied that he could not believe that such an unrivaled strategist lived in abject poverty. He also added that his offer for Lionel to join him still stood. The man told Lionel to become his second in command, and then he would no longer need money. Lionel smiled awkwardly and said that General Kaidos's offer was very interesting, but he could not leave his girls alone, at least not until they became first-class adventurers. Lionel introduced the team. Asuka was shaking the bag, screaming that there was no money left, and Meisha, with the last of her strength, said that she was hungry. Lionel did not believe that they would ever become first-class warriors. Lionel started crying and saying that he was the girl's teacher, but he couldn't leave them alone and it was very hard for him. Then General Kaito said that Lionel really was like their mother, who had a hard time managing her children. The man suggested leaving a very profitable request with a good salary for the Hope clan. Lionel immediately stopped crying and said that it would be very good. Sometime later, Lionel held the letter in fear and thought that he had agreed quite readily then, but he still did not understand something unusual about this request. Lionel looked at the reward for completing the request and didn't understand why they could pay more for simply cleaning the mansion than for killing goblins. Asuka was glad that General Kaitos took care of Anita and the Hope clan and that he also gave her the sword from Jennifer. She considers Kaitos a nice person and her second favorite after Lionel. Miliaria interrupted Asuka's joyful cry and hesitantly turned to Lionel, who was standing very close. The girl clasped her hands and said that if they asked so much of the general, it meant that if General Kaitos got into an emergency, they would have to rush to help him. She asked if she was really right in her judgment. Meisha was eating a delicious lollipop at that moment. She looked at Lionel and said that it was very good that Lionel was friends with General Kaitos. The girl continued to lick the candy, but at that moment Lionel said that he was not sure that it was good. Meisha was surprised when she heard such words from the young man. Lionel said that if General Kaitos loses his power or is suspected of rebellion, it means that the entire Hope clan with all its members will also be drawn into all this. Meisha and Miliaria looked at Lionel with complete seriousness. It seemed like they hadn't even thought about this happening, so now there was no time for jokes. Asuka laughingly said that if Lionel thought too much, he would go bald. Lionel panicked and started touching his hair, hoping that he wouldn't lose it. A little later, towards evening, Asuka was screaming with tears in her eyes about how General Kaitos was a complete fool. She was screaming about how she hated this man who called himself a general. Lionel turned to the girl and said that in the morning she shouted that, on the contrary, she adored General Kaitos. Asuka and Punk turned towards the young man and began to say that she did not know that the man had such a big mansion. Miliaria sighed, looking at the girl, and said that the reward for this request was quite high, so a huge mansion was a given. Meisha also laughed and said that it was obvious that for such a sum the task would be quite difficult. The next moment the girls took off their clothes. Meisha said that if they continued to mope, they would not have time to finish all the work imposed on them. Miliaria said that she would start with cleaning the second floor and would begin right away. Lionel was embarrassed and began to cover his face with his hands. He tried to pick up all the clothes from the ground by touch. The young man asked the girls why they had undressed at all. Meisha answered that they had done so as not to stain their clothes. She said that if they got dirty, they would just take a bath and they would have to walk home in their clothes. Lionel turned and started waving at the girl, closing his eyes. The young man told the girls to just put on some change of clothes. Suddenly, the young man touched Meisha's form with his hand, which made the girl scream and tell the young man to stop. She instantly became embarrassed and closed her eyes. Lionel was embarrassed and immediately removed his hand. He apologized to Meisha and said that he did not do it on purpose. Meisha put her hand to her cheek in embarrassment. The girl remained silent and did not answer. Lionel became confused and began to ask if the girls really didn't bring a change of clothes with them, and if he needed to constantly check their luggage before missions. Miliaria, who was gathering her clothes, said that Lionel was very wrong. Lionel asked if he was really so wrong. Miliaria smiled and looked at the young man confidently. The girl said that these were the only clothes they had at all. The girl repeated and said that these were the only outfits they had. At this point, Asuka took off her underwear and said that it was time for their first big request. She borrowed some money and bought all the essentials for cleaning. The girl looked very confident and seemed not to be embarrassed at all. Lionel looked at Asuka in panic and told the girl not to take off her underwear when they were not at home. Suddenly, some kind of realization came to the young man. He told the girl to stop while he tried to process the information that had just entered his brain. The young man looked at the girls running away to the mansion and asked if that meant they were in some kind of debt. The girls asked after them what difference did it make since it was time to clean up this huge mansion. The young man agreed and said that they could start cleaning then. A little later, the girls began cleaning the mansion so that everything would shine. Lionel changed into his spare clothes and was clearing weeds from the plot. He thought that the girls' teamwork was definitely top-notch. They were very close and would never leave each other in trouble. Lionel thought of his former brother and comrade and thought that he hoped that the girls would treasure their beautiful and strong friendship for a long time, and that what was going to happen to him and Luke would not happen to them. Lionel stood up from the ground and cursed. He was surprised that this garden was incredibly large and he would have to work here for a very long time. The young man scratched the back of his head. Lionel looked at the beautiful mountains and the lake beyond the fence and thought how happy General Kaido's was. The young man dreamed of a luxurious house on the shore of the lake, considering this place picturesque. Lionel was very tired, so he thought about taking a swim in that beautiful and bright lake. Suddenly, the windows in the mansion opened and Asuka appeared in them. The girl was ordering everyone to climb aboard. The girl asked the boy to play with them. Lionel turned to the girl and said that they had not finished their work yet, so she should put off the idea of playing any games. Asuka was surprised to tell the young man that they would need to stay here for 3 or 4 days to work. She warned Lionel about the need to buy food and other things. Lionel pointed at Asuka and said that the girls also need to buy clothes for work so that the girls don't have to wear underwear. Asuka was surprised and said that they are comfortable enough to walk and work. Asuka suggested buying bathing suits for a vacation on the lake. Meisha, smiling, said that she wanted something tasty. Miliaria suggested trying the capital's signature dish. Lionel looked at the cheerful girls who were chatting sweetly near the window. He smiled and sighed and then said that his subordinates were at it again. He decided that he would definitely not let them waste their money. Then the girls called Lionel and asked him to hurry up because they might be late and not buy delicious food. Asuka suggested buying bathing suits for a vacation on the lake. Meisha, smiling, said that she wanted something tasty. Miliaria suggested trying the capital's signature dish. After some time, the guys arrived in the city. Asuka looked at the assortment of swimsuits and was shocked that it was not just a swimsuit, but some kind of ropes. The girl was embarrassed. Meisha noticed the revealing swimsuit and said that nuns don't wear clothes like that, but if Lionel takes pity on her, she doesn't mind. The young man added that no one forces girls to buy clothes. Then Lionel looked at the work clothes and told the girls that this was the kind of clothes they needed now. The young man was serious. After a while, the girls were fully dressed in work clothes. They were wearing light shirts and light trousers. Meisha looked at her clothes and said that when she put on this uniform, her dreams and hopes seemed to have been blown away by the wind. Lionel told the girl that anything was better than working in just underwear. He also added that at least he wouldn't see their bodies since the girls had no shame. Meisha said that the young man was lying to them. She added that he really liked to see them in their underwear because it was visible from the protruding part of the young man's body. At that moment, everyone in the store heard the girl's words and were very surprised. Lionel immediately began to cover the girl's mouth with his hand and asked her to stop talking such nonsense because it was causing misunderstandings in people's minds. At this point, other people began to whisper about Lionel and the girls and point their fingers at them. Lionel started to twist and turn his head and said that the girls can buy whatever they want because their money is their business. The girls at this point listened attentively to the young man. Asuka started touching and brushing her hair. The girls said that they couldn't spend too much money because they still had some debts to pay off. Lionel added that they had finally solved the money problem. Lionel smiled and said that when they returned to Halia, he would pay for the girl with money from the clan's budget. An adventurer's equipment must be paid for by the clan he belongs to. The clan receives income from the work of its members. It is in the interests of the clan itself to provide its adventurers with the best equipment so that the adventurers can then earn even more money for the clan. Asuka looked at the boy with confusion and asked if that was really the case. She said that she didn't think so at all. The girl added that she had some strange doubts. Lionel looked at the cheerful girls and thought that the truth was that it was unbearable to look at such girls who had to buy equipment and clothes for work on credit. The next moment, the girls threw themselves on the young man's neck and began to hug him. Asuka screamed that Lionel was the best mommy in the world. Miliaria screamed that she loved Lionel. Meisha said that she would always be with Lionel. Lionel shouted at the girls that they were doing some strange farce. He asked the girl to stop talking to him like that and said that now they needed to go get firewood and food. The girls all agreed with the words of the young man. After a while, the boys buy some firewood as well as a whole bag of groceries. Lionel thought about it and said that this should definitely be enough. Meisha put her hands to her face and smiled. She said that when they returned, they would have a meat festival. Asuka and Malaria were also happy, standing next to Meisha. However, Lionel yelled at the girls and said that they needed to clean up first. Suddenly, something gurgled next to Lionel and disappeared into the water. Lionel focused on what gurgled right next to his ear. He looked into the water and thought it was some kind of fish, but then he realized it was some kind of very loud fish splash, so it could be some kind of very large fish. Suddenly, the young man's thoughts were interrupted by the girls who asked him why he was standing there and asked the young man to hurry up. Lionel turned around and said that he was already on his way. At that moment, a monster appeared right out of the water and continued to watch the young man. Some time later, when it was already deep into the night, Asuka sighed and said that she could no longer fit such a large amount of delicious food. Meisha smiled and said she would like more. The girls looked happy. Miliaria turned to the young man and asked if he had looked into the lake and noticed anything interesting. Lionel said that he noticed something but thought it was a certain small thing in the form of a very large fish. The boys washed the dishes together and talked. Their conversation was interrupted by Asuka, who looked out the window. She called Lionel. The girl said that the city looked strange. Lionel asked the girl why she thought so. Something was happening in the city at that time. Smoke was visible and there was a lot of light. People ran in terror and screamed that they were being attacked by terrible monsters. At that moment, fish-like monsters were chasing them, mercilessly attacking the people running towards them. Lionel, Miliaria, Meisha, and Asuka were very surprised when they heard the screams of frightened people. They did not understand how these monsters could appear in the city. Lionel looked at the fish-like monsters and said that they were called Sahajin. These monsters kill and eat people not for their own food, but just for fun. They are the real demons. The girls turned and called his name. The young man looked at the girls with absolute calm and then agreed and said that he would immediately prepare everything necessary to fight these monsters. Then he turned to the girls and said that as soon as they were ready, they should go outside to fight the monsters. The girls nodded in agreement. They were very serious. After some time, people begged for salvation. The monsters, however, pounced on the defenseless citizens in a pack and mercilessly killed them, leaving no chance for salvation. The man approached the dark-haired boy, calling him a guard, and demanded that the guards deal with the monsters that had entered the city. The guard, in a panic, replied that he had never fought such powerful creatures. The next moment, a lizard-like monster ran up to the civilian man and pierced the man with its trident-shaped spear. The man let out a final death cry as blood began to flow out of him. The guard screamed in horror. The man screamed at the top of his lungs that monsters were attacking the city. He saw the monster that had recently killed the man in front of him, but he didn't notice that there was another monster right behind him. The next moment, one of the monsters bit off the guard's head and the second monster pierced him with a spear. At that moment, a little girl was crying nearby, calling for her mom and dad. Suddenly, the girl noticed a huge monster next to her. The girl finished speaking and asked her parents where they were. Horror was written on her face. The girl suddenly shrank and covered her head with her hands. The monster was about to grab her and kill her, but suddenly his head flew off his shoulders from Asuka's sharp sword, who was right behind this monster. Asuka extended her hand to the crying girl and asked her if she was okay. The girl stopped crying and opened her eyes to look at the one who was speaking to her. Asuka took the girl with her and called Lionel. The girl added and said that she had killed that monster. The little girl was in Asuka's arms and realized that she had been saved. Asuka then handed the little girl over to the other civilian adults and helped her with her hand. At that moment, Lionel shouted at Asuka not to let her guard down. The boy told Asuka that she was lucky to hit the monster's weak spot, but they were very fast. He warned her not to expose her back. Asuka, holding her sword tightly, confirmed that she understood. The next moment, the monster attacked the girl. It used its spear in the form of a trident and let out a terrible roar. Asuka defended herself with her sword and gritted her teeth because the monster was quite strong. The next moment, she shouted and hit the monster with her sweeping attack. The girl made her attacks with ease. The monster was surprised and touched his shoulder with his hand, where a small scratch appeared. Asuka was happy and said that she was able to cut this monster. The monster looked at his bloody hand, in which lay several of his bloody scales. The next moment, the monster screamed and headed straight for Asuka to kill her. The monster began to make quick and stabbing movements with his trident-shaped spear. At the same time, he was making terrible screams. At that moment, Asuka quickly jumped aside. She screamed that this monster was very angry. At that moment, a lizard-like monster stabbed with a trident-shaped spear straight towards Asuka. The girl was able to dodge but was frightened. The next moment, someone's voice was heard about the summoning of the fire spear skill. The next moment, this lizard-like monster was engulfed in a pillar of bright flame which killed it in the blink of an eye and did not give it a single chance to live. Finally, the monster let out a final heart-rending scream. Asuka spotted Miliaria on the roof, ready to attack with her magic staff. Miliaria offered to help her in the fight, and Asuka thanked her. One of the men, claiming to be guards, asked Lionel if they were adventurers and warned him that the main body of guards was heading towards the lake where there were many wounded. Lionel confirmed that he understood his words. Lionel shouted for Miliaria to support him and Asuka as she held the staff firmly. He then told Meisha to go to the lake to use Restore from a distance. At this time, the guards who were fighting the monsters shouted that they had an opportunity because the adventurers had distracted the Sahajins. They decided to start a retreat together. Lionel held his sword out in front of him and shouted to the guards that the Sahajin were on the right flank. He ordered them to attack immediately. The men ran straight at their opponents, shouting for them to die right now. Gathering together and armed with axes and knives, the men began to attack the lizard-like monsters, which they did very well. At that moment, Asuka happily turned to Lionel and said that she felt very cool. The girl was happy. Lionel wiped the sweat from his face when he said that the girl was doing very well. The young man then smiled and told Asuka not to let her guard down under any circumstances, because these lizard-like monsters would not run away because they were not those weak goblins. The girl approached the boy and replied that she understood the boy. She said that she would cover the boy from behind, so she asked him to stand behind the girl because the boy should command in safety. Lionel told the girl that he wasn't counting on her help. The next moment, they ran away from each other in different directions. Together, they were ready for further combat. A little later, Lionel commanded the local guard. He said that the monsters had managed to break through to the center, so he demanded that the guards push them out of this very center. The men understood Lionel's order and agreed to carry it out. The lizard monsters prepared to attack. One of them threw a spear at the young man, but Lionel managed to dodge, realizing that he was too close to danger. The monsters began to retreat and the guards rushed after them. Lionel realized that he had to use his fighting spirit and his numerical advantage. He ordered the right wing to stay in position. He ordered them to go back and lure the enemy. The men were glad that they had the upper hand against these monsters and answered Lionel that they accepted his order and called him Lord Strategist. Miliaria with long-range magic and Meisha with healing skills were on the roof of the building when the humans said that they needed to take one more breath to win. Lionel and Asuka were also staying close to each other. Someone even shouted that he had a second wind and they would definitely be able to win against these lizard-like monsters. After some time, the lizards were defeated. The surviving people covered the bodies of their comrades and others mourned them. Asuka passed by them. She saw Lionel sitting on one of the wooden boxes, talking about how it was finally over. Asuka turned to the boy and let him know that she was nearby. The girl handed the boy a mug of drink and thanked him for his hard work. Lionel called the girl by name, but he looked very tired. The young man looked at the girl's face and realized that Asuka's expression also showed how very tired she was. The young man thanked the girl for the drink she had brought. Asuka smiled sweetly in response. They bumped their fists and Lionel said that this fight was very good. The girl answered the boy positively and smiled very tiredly. Asuka's name was suddenly called and she turned around. It was the little girl that Asuka had recently saved from the lizard-like monster. The girl smiled and thanked Asuka for saving her. The girl pointed towards her mom and dad, who nodded positively in response and said that her mom and dad were safe. And then she wanted to give Asuka something, which the girl was very surprised. The girl smiled from ear to ear and thanked Asuka for saving them. The girl handed Asuka a flower. There was an incredibly joyful atmosphere around her. Asuka agreed and told the girl not to thank her. The girl waved and said goodbye. Lionel watched this, and Asuka, holding a flower, looked sad. While Lionel, Miliaria, Asuka, and Meisha celebrated their victory over the monsters that attacked the city, Luke wandered the city streets at night, lost in his thoughts. In some unfamiliar and dark space, Luke was sitting down, leaning on his knee and quietly calling his former lover named Fina, whom he once wounded. Suddenly, the man's eyes turned furious. He screamed and asked the girl why she betrayed him, and at that moment he swung his sword straight at the girl. His face showed the desire to kill. However, all this turned out to be just a bad dream that Fina had. The girl opened her eyes in horror to wake up and stop this whole nightmare. The girl realized that she was in her bed in one of the local hospitals. She immediately felt pain in her arm and made a sound of pain. The girl remembered what had happened earlier when Luke had cut off her hand and realized that about 3 months had passed since then and she was still tormented by nightmares. It was hard for the girl to bear them. She touched the place where her arm had once been and realized that she finally needed to figure out how she planned to continue living with such a terrible body without an arm, because it was very difficult for a disabled girl to live in this world. Fina sighed and said with a hesitant smile that perhaps it would have been better if she had died that day. At that moment, Luke appeared in the window and cast a shadow of his body right onto Fina. The girl was very scared when she saw him. She was even a little surprised. The girl asked if it was really Luke. Luke was silently making his way through the window in the girl's room at that moment. Fina smiled uncertainly and said that Luke had apparently escaped from prison to complete his unfinished attempt on her life, which in other words was to simply kill her. Suddenly, Luke threw the bag on the girl's bed and said that he hoped that the money would be enough to cover the girl's living expenses. Fina looked at the bag in surprise. Luke said that of course this money would not be enough for a lifetime, but for a couple of months this money should be enough. Fina approached Luke and, holding him by his clothes, expressed her disappointment, thinking that he hated her. She provoked him by offering to kill her and said that he could not earn her forgiveness with mere money. Fina laughed nervously and said that Luke had abandoned his best friend and all his friends had abandoned him. She provoked the man, claiming that he would live as a man who had disabled his beloved. Suddenly, Luke told the girl not to say anything, and the next moment he pierced her body with the sharp blade of his sword. The girl immediately fell silent and stopped saying anything. Luke approached her and asked Fina what her last words would be. The girl was surprised and her eyes began to cloud over a little. Then Luke pulled away from the girl's ear a little. Fina smiled as blood started to flow from her mouth. She touched Luke's face with her hand and said that they would meet in hell next time. Luke laid Fina on the bed to die peacefully. Then he let out a small laugh and said that he would go get the girl soon. Luke, with angry eyes and a wild smile, expressed his gratitude to his best friend and brother, Lionel, whose face showed malice. After some time, Lionel came to the mansion of General Kaitos. The young man was very surprised when they started talking about awarding him a medal. Lionel did not understand what they were going to award him a medal for. General Kaitos folded his arms and said that the mayor of the city expressed his deep gratitude to those who dealt with the monsters that attacked the city. The man told the young man not to be shy and to just accept the medal. Lionel replied that even though it was General Kaitos himself who said this, they hadn't finished cleaning the man's mansion yet. General Kaitos said that he would simply hire someone else to finish what the boys hadn't had time to finish because the city had been attacked by monsters. General Kaitos added that it was not proper for a hero of the city to clean someone's mansion. The general asked the young man if it was possible that he was somehow wrong. Lionel was very surprised by the man's words and did not even know what to answer him. Then General Kaitos, Lionel, Miliaria, Asuka, and Meisha stood up from their seats and walked towards the exit. General Kaitos said that the young man was planning a dinner party, so the boys should have a good rest at the event together. Lionel was surprised by the man's words that he couldn't even answer him, because it's not every time someone is given a dinner party where he is the main character. At that moment, Asuka was behind the boy. The girl was very depressed. She thought about the medal and realized that they did not deserve it. Miliaria approached the girl and began to continue her speech about how the city had suffered enormous damage. so she also believed that they did not deserve this magnificent medal. The girls' thoughts were interrupted by Meisha, who with a smile asked the girls not to talk nonsense because they saved many lives and did not allow the city to be razed to the ground. Meisha smiled and looked at the girls with a kind look. Meisha called Asuka and Miliaria by name. The girls became wary when Meisha called them, and then the girls immediately remembered the flower that the little girl gave Asuka. Lionel watched the girls cheer up after Meisha cheered them up. He thought that instead of being sad about those who weren't helped, he should be happy for those who were saved. Lionel understood the meaning of Meisha's words. Meisha was smiling and her entire aura was shining. Lionel couldn't take his eyes off her and thought that she looked very much like a holy priestess. Although he immediately discarded these thoughts and realized that this was just Meisha encouraging her friends. However, Meisha interrupted Lionel's thoughts and said that, besides, they were invited to a dinner party so it could be considered a feast where there would be a lot of meat. Lionel shouted and said that they were not that hungry. Kaido's mansion, the young man scratched his head and admitted that he had not expected such a wonderful evening. He thanked the general for his generosity, especially for the suit he had provided. General Kaitos replied that he had been impressed by the young man. General Kaitos expressed surprise that the young man could defeat the powerful Sakujins with such powers. He asked if the young man considered himself capable of becoming a commander and leading the military. Lionel noted that this was the third time the general had raised the question. General Kaitos then turned to Lionel and asked where his sweet daughters had gone. Lionel looked away and said that it seemed they were not that far away. The young man and the man looked at the beautiful Asuka, Meisha, and Miliaria. The girls were wearing gorgeous dresses and everything around them was sparkling with glitter. General Kaitos smiled and said that the girls were simply beautiful and it was very good that he had gone to so much trouble and found such beautiful dresses for them. Lionel agreed and began to cry with joy. The young man understood that he really felt like a mother who had come to her daughter's wedding. Lionel watched the girls interact with the guests and recalled the difficult missions they had together. He noted that Asuka, Meisha, and Miliaria had matured, but he still wished they would act their age. Lionel's thoughts were interrupted by the mayor, who inquired about his impressions of the dinner and greeted General Kaitos. The general returned the greeting. Lionel noticed that the number of drunken men at the party was rapidly increasing. The mayor, turning to Lionel, repeated that he could not believe his victory over the Sakujins, admiring his abilities. Lionel thought that General Kaitos had already told him the same thing more than once. Lionel said no to the man's words. The mayor was very surprised when Lionel refused his words. However, the young man continued and said that the most important factor was that they were fighting a defensive battle. Because the people who fought for the city loved it so much that they were not afraid to risk their lives to protect it. At that moment in the hall, the men who were defending the city were joyful and happy. Lionel brought the glass of drink to his mouth and said that therefore it was not entirely his achievement. It seemed that the young man was very gallant and polite. Suddenly the mayor slapped Lionel very hard on the back and began to laugh. He added that he thought the young man was very modest. The mayor was very pleased with the young man's modesty. Lionel choked and immediately began to wipe the rest of the drink from his mouth, looking at Mr. Mayor. He mentally asked the man about his modesty and then mentally said that it was not true. Lionel looked at the cheerful Asuka, Meisha, and Miliaria and thought that it was natural for people to try to protect what they love. It seemed like the young man loved his girls very much. He remembered how the people of the city were eager to fight to protect what they loved. The young man thought that whether it was a city or a family, everyone would fall into despair and fight to the end, even if they did not like any conflict. Lionel thinks about his actions and understands that he simply took advantage of all the feelings and emotions that the city's residents used. Capable commanders and the general's staff would have handled this incident perfectly well. Suddenly Lionel comes to his senses and thinks that it happened to him again, that his mind was in analysis mode again. His thoughts were interrupted by General Kaitos, who was looking away. He was supported by the mayor, who was smiling. General Kaitos said that it was precisely such character traits and events that created aspiring heroes. General Kaitos waved to Asuka, expressing his confidence to Lionel that his daughters would continue to live carefree lives. Asuka returned the greeting and Miliaria and Meisha smiled at the general. The conversation between Kaidos and Lionel was interrupted by the mayor, who told the young man that he drank drinks all the time, and then asked if the young man had tried any tasty dishes. The young man remembered that he had eaten nothing at all, so he wished himself a pleasant appetite. Lionel, having taken the tasty fish, thought with relief that he was finished with drinks. He only held the glass and said hello, but decided to move on to food. Lionel was amazed by the taste of the dish. He decided that it was incredibly tasty and prepared by a real culinary master, although from high-quality meat. Lionel realized there was a slightly sour sauce in the marinade, but he also found onions and wine in the food. Lionel realized that this dish represented all the flavor and quality of a very expensive meat. Lionel began to shake and thought that if he could take this dish home, he could definitely cook it. General Kaidos noticed Lionel's behavior and apologized to him for interrupting his report on the food. Then General Kaidos said that once they had finished the banquet, the young man had better return to Gaul as soon as possible. Lionel was surprised by what he heard and even tensed up a little. Lionel saw the worried face of General Kaidos and knew that something serious had happened. The general reported that a medical facility had been broken into and a patient had been killed. Lionel was shocked by this news. General Kaidos added, while no one present was listening, that the one who was killed was an adventurer. This adventurer was named Fina. Lionel realized that General Kaidos was talking about the same Fina that Luke had once loved. Lionel couldn't believe his ears that Fina had been killed. He remembered that the girl had lost her arm, which meant that the path to becoming an adventurer was definitely closed to her, and even with an ordinary life the girl would have had undeniable problems. Lionel Preza closed his eyes and realized that Luke had done all this. The young man thought that his former friend and brother had learned his lesson when he was sent to prison, but he couldn't even forgive this girl whose life he had ruined. In the slums on the outskirts of the city, Luke entered one of the abandoned buildings. One of the men, mistaking him for one of their own, asked if he had found anything useful, but it turned out that it was not his subordinate, but Luke. Suddenly, Luke took out his sword and said that from now on this gang of thugs belongs entirely to him. He tells the gang leader that he will kill him immediately. Luke's eyes look very wild and dangerous, like a wild animal. The man called the leader, saying that Luke had gone crazy. The leader cursed Luke, said that apologies were useless, and ordered him to be killed. The bandits rushed at Luke, who prepared for battle. Suddenly, Luke rushed straight ahead and cut off the head of the gang leader with his sword. Luke was smiling at this moment and anticipating his obvious victory. The men who were near their boss realized that he was dead and screamed that it simply couldn't be. Luke shook his sword to clean the blood off it. He told the gang members that this was all their leader could do. Luke, having crushed the leader's head with his foot, offered the gang members a choice: serve him or die like their former boss. The bandits were shocked and scared, realizing that they were facing a real monster. Sometime later, Lionel, Asuka, Meisha, and Miliaria arrived at the local Adventurers Guild. Jennifer thanked the boys for their hard work in escorting and protecting the merchant, as well as solving the crime and catching the criminals. The girl could not believe that those men used the girl as a cover, while they themselves attacked the poor adventurers. Jennifer smiled and said that since this incident was due to the carelessness of the guild management, in addition to compensation, they also included a consolation prize. The girl was very friendly. Lionel looked at Jennifer suspiciously and thought that, in his opinion, this was definitely not an accident, but a carefully planned plan by her. At that moment, the girl smiled very sweetly and looked at the young man. Lionel realized that Jennifer had deliberately sent them with the traders to investigate the case. She had been consulting with the victims of the attacks, and the Hope clan was the best candidate for this investigation. The guild couldn't do anything about these brutal criminal merchants, relying only on their suspicions and unsubstantiated accusations from the victims, so this time Lionel and the girls intervened in the whole situation. Lionel decided to leave everything as it was. Jennifer agreed with the young man's words and said that perhaps it would be better for all of them. Then Lionel changed the subject and asked about the recently murdered Fina. The young man wondered if it was possible that Luke had committed this crime in the form of a murderer. Jennifer began to talk about the name of the culprit. Jennifer sighed and said that she couldn't say anything about it, and she also couldn't name the culprit because there was no evidence that Luke did it. However, judging by the state of the wound, it can be said that Fina was killed by a skilled craftsman, although there were no signs of resistance. Lionel asked what happened next. Jennifer said she didn't know, but she had some information that might interest him. Lionel was surprised. Jennifer continued and said that one of the gangs that operates behind the scenes has a new leader. This gang is very well known, so the news of the change of leader immediately spread throughout the city. Lionel immediately asked Jennifer if it could be Luke and then asked if there was any proof. Jennifer replied that unfortunately, the Adventurers Guild had no proof that it could be Luke. The girl smiled awkwardly and said that she personally could say for sure that it was obviously Luke. The girl answered the young man's question about why she thought so and said that it was her female intuition. Lionel was surprised by the girl's words and made a sound in his throat. He thought that this was already some kind of gift of every girl, which could be called holy female intubation. The young man then waved to Jennifer and said goodbye. He thanked her for the information and said he would keep it in mind. The young man headed towards the girls. Sometime later, the boys returned home. Lionel said that, as they say, visiting is nice but home is best. However, he noticed one very strange thing. The boys, when they left one cat to catch mice, but now they came and saw 2 cats. Lionel said that he did not know that cats can divide into parts and double. Asuka picked up the cat and said that Lionel thought it was all wrong and that the little cat was a girl. Lionel frowned and said that he just wanted to believe in the possibility that it wouldn't happen. Lionel picked up the cat and chided him for bringing girls into the house in his absence, calling him strange, preoccupied, and disobedient. Miliaria sarcastically asked if he was jealous of the cat or if it was just jealousy. Meisha sat down and started petting the cat. She said that the house was too big for one cat. Asuka added that the house was huge, like a royal castle where you can hide from the rain and find food. The girl suggested that the cat was lonely in such a big house and had simply brought himself a friend. Then the girls looked at Lionel pleadingly, asking if they could keep the second cat. Lionel, slightly panicked, immediately agreed. Later, Lionel said that pets are very nice but they need to clean the house, so he ordered the girls to get ready and start cleaning the house. The girls were surprised that they had to clean again. Lionel said that they had to clean up again, and then he said that the girls should start cleaning up and wait for him. Asuka was surprised and asked the boy where he was going. Lionel smiled and said that he had already warned the girls that he already had a couple of things he needed to do upon his return. Lionel introduced an evil male bandit with a scar on his cheek. The man spoke, asking the boy if he understood correctly that Lionel wanted to take on the debts of these 3 girls. The man asked Lionel if he was in his right mind. The man added that he had lent the girls money in the capital, and if they did not repay the loan, they would have to go to feed the fish or do forced labor in the mines. Lionel imagined this picture. The man took Lionel by the shoulders and said that he hoped the young man had heard him and that they would finally act according to the agreement. Lionel thought that this was roughly how he had imagined it, but his ideas instantly crumbled to dust. A smiling old lady asked if his name was Lionel. Introducing herself as Marie, she said she was very pleased to meet him. Lionel was surprised to see such an elegant old lady in front of him. Lionel apologized for the delay in greeting, introduced himself, and said that he was the head of the clan of girls. The woman jokingly asked if he was not each of their mothers. Lionel got angry and wondered if the woman was saying too much. However, his thoughts were interrupted by the woman asking the young man if she could help him with anything. Lionel said that as far as he understood, the woman had previously helped the girl become adventurers, paying for everything necessary. And now it could be assumed that the woman would also repay the debt taken again. The young man was serious when he spoke about this. The woman was surprised and said that she thought this was going a bit too far. Lionel got nervous and thought that he thought so too. The woman agreed and said that she would do it only this once and only out of pity for them. They were in debt almost all the time, and because of this they had no opportunity to buy the clothes they wanted. Lionel thought that without the help of this intelligent lady, something would have definitely happened to the girls, because at the time of their first meeting the girls were using a rather aggressive and dangerous technique. They had survived until they met him only because this woman had paid for their equipment. Otherwise, Asuka would have died in the first battle, and Meisha would not have been able to help her. Lionel imagined Asuka dying in Miliaria's arms. He also imagines what would happen to the remaining two girls when they were deprived of their only protector. He thinks that an answer is not needed here because it is absolutely obvious. Lionel looked at the woman and thought that he hoped the woman would be able to pay off at least part of the girls' debts. The woman stood up from her seat and asked the young man not to spoil them too much. Suddenly, the woman turned around and walked away. Lionel was surprised and called Lady Mary by name. At that moment, the woman was trying to find something where she had put it. Lionel did not understand what the woman was talking about. At this point, Lady Mary returned to the young man and said that she had found the girl's credit history. The next moment, the woman tore up all the sheets of paper that contained the girl's credit history. Lionel was very surprised when he looked at the falling pieces of paper. Then the woman put down a bag of money and said that it was the money she had been hiding from the girls. Lionel did not understand what was happening. He realized that Lady Mary had put money aside for the girls so that they could pay off their debts. The young man asked the woman why she was doing this. Lady Mary smiled and said that if she had not started saving the girls' money herself, they would have spent it all at once because they were still children. Lionel pictured those carefree girls and thought that it was hard to disagree with Lady Mary. He thought that Lady Mary was a very kind and good woman. She had shown so much generosity and understanding to those three orphan girls. Lionel took the money and bowed, thinking that he would like to have such a mother. He promised to protect the girls and teach them many things. They shook hands and Lady Mary, thanking him, jokingly called him a real mother. After a while, the young man said that he was done with his business. Lionel was thinking that maybe he should first look for some request in the guild and then go home. At that moment, a young guy was rushing towards the young man. This young man ran straight into Lionel, which scared him out of surprise. The young man immediately pulled out Lionel's wallet from his pocket and, smiling, apologized to the gentleman. Suddenly, Lionel grabbed the young man to stop him from stealing the boy's wallet, and the thief started screaming that he was in pain. The next moment, the thief's cap fell to the ground and a girl appeared in front of Lionel, crying because she was in great pain. The girl shouted at the boy and asked what he was doing and why he was hurting her. Lionel realized that the thief was an ordinary girl. He apologized, explaining that he mistook her for a hunter of lonely adventurers. The girl replied that she did not do such things and that Lionel himself was to blame for what happened. Lionel agreed and said that he was going. The girl was surprised that the young man would just leave. Lionel stuffed something into his pocket and said that if the girl needed anything or had any problems, she could find him at the Adventurers Guild. He would try to help her with something. A little later, the girl sighed and said that this meeting was somehow terrible. Suddenly, she realized something and was very scared. The girl, looking for her purse, remembered that Lionel had put something in her pocket. She immediately accused him of stealing, shouting that he was a thief. Sometime later, a girl burst into the Adventurers Guild and called Lionel by name. The young man smiled and said that the girl came to him rather quickly. The girl was very angry and beside herself with rage. Lionel asked why she was so hot-tempered and suggested that they calm down over a cup of tea, saying that he could treat her to one since he had some money. The girl screamed at him not to spend her money. Jennifer watched all this and did not understand anything. She turned to Lionel and said that she, of course, did not hint at anything, but the young man seemed to be overdoing it a little. Lionel smiled and said that Jennifer was right. Lionel gave the girl her wallet back. She grabbed it and got angry. Then she said that the boy wanted something from her. She asks him if he really thought he would take her wallet, give it back, and then she would have to do him a favor. Lionel answered and said that he just wanted to talk to her. The girl was surprised and did not understand what the young man was going to talk to her about. The girl asked the boy why he wanted to talk to her. Lionel said that when she went out to rob someone, she didn't need to take her wallet with her. If the girl had not had this wallet with her, there would have been no need to return, and by this logic, there is always a chance of being detained by the guards for attempted theft. And even though he stole the girl's wallet, he still told her where to look for it and is even willing to return it. However, the fact that he is here means that the girl knows his name and who he is, she also knows. The girl said, answering the boy's question, that he is one of the leaders of a clan founded by two orphans. Lionel is a great strategist who raised his clan to the top after only 10 years. Jennifer laughed and said that the girl would not be able to get herself into a favorable position by speaking beautifully to Lionel. Lionel was embarrassed and thought that this was too much praise for him. The girl continued and said about the best clan, Golden Thread. Lionel heard these words and turned his attention to the girl. Then the girl said something about the Golden Thread clan again and then took it back and said something about Lionel from the Hope clan. She apologized to him for that incident and said that she was from the Megrad Thieves Guild. Lionel thought about the Thieves Guild and realized that even though it was not officially recognized, it was a banned organization. But as a necessary evil, the authorities turned a blind eye to it. They prevent the overgrowth of criminals by taking potential orphans and turning them into pickpockets and prostitutes. It sounds bad, but for them it's better than waiting for death in the open air. Even with such a cruel fate, they can live. Currently, they save more lives than the aristocrats who are assigned the same task. He realized that the girl was one of the members of such a guild of thieves. At that moment, the girl said that she wanted Lionel to help her. Suddenly, the girl asked if the boy could defeat him, their new leader of the clan of thieves, whose name is Luke Blade of the Hawk. Lionel was very surprised by the girl's words and scared because of her request.